2019. I am Primus Hutchinson. Well, the house session for the morning is about to begin. The speaker has entered the house, and we're about to it's about to start with prayers. So.
Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign, present decree justice, from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom and understanding. We, your people of God, we are assembled here this morning. We seek your wisdom, your knowledge, your understanding, that you guide your people of God even as they deliberate issues concerning your nation. Father, we lift our speaker in your hands. Father, we ask you to guide him, even as he guides this house of God. Lead him, O God, even as he leads, O God. We pray for your presence, O God, to be with your people, that everything said and done will be done according to your will. We pray that, Lord, you grant that they will have your fear before your eyes, O God, that they will lay aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections. The result of our counsel may be to the glory and honor of your holy name, through religion, justice, safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public will, peace and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of our heart, for all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity towards one another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his light of countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Honorable members, before we sit, I ask that we stand in silence for remembering member of this parliament, Gaspar Shalman, who passed away on the 30th of September and was buried on his birthday, the 19th of October. Thank you very much, honorable members. Please be seated. Honorable members, I have received excuses from the following members: Honorable Member for Grizzly and Minister for Equity, Social Justice, Local Government and Empowerment; Honorable Member for Babono and Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries, Physical Planning, Natural Resources and Cooperatives, who are both out of state. I have also received excuses from the member for Beaufort South, as well as the member for Library. Honorable members, I beg to announce that since the last sitting of Parliament, His Excellency has been pleased to assent to the following bills: the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Bill and the Sanctions Counter-Proliferation Financing Bill. Honorable members, and I know that the Minister and Member for Mikud North will join me. Honorable members, not honorable members. I am saying that I know that the Minister of Education and Member for Mikud North will be pleased when I see that this is the last sitting that plastic bottles will be used in this Parliament. Arrangements will be made and members will be so informed in due course. Members, let me also inform you that I have been served. I was personally served on Sunday by Mr. Martinez Francois with papers to answer to claim number SLU HCV 2019-294 Martinez Francois against the Honorable Andy Daniel, Speaker of the House of Assembly. I'm just so informing the Honorable House that I have been personally served with papers. Read the appointment of a Deputy Speaker. Because we're still in Creole Heritage Month, we shall be providing honorable members with a Creole lunch today. Statements from ministers?
No.
Prime Minister?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin with my statement, I certainly want to recognize Mr. Gaspar Charlemagne, who was a colleague of mine on his passing, and I want to express my sympathies to the constituency of Soufrière-Fonce-Jacques, where he honorably served, and also to extend my sympathies to his family, his daughters, and to his immediate family members. Gaspar was a good man, a church-going man, and I know one that cared deeply about his constituency. I also want to give my sympathies for Mother Mariana Pinto, who also has recently passed away. Mother Mariana was a pillar of strength for the Catholic Church, and I would say that anybody, even outside being part of the Catholic Church, that she was a beacon of light and hope for many, many, many people. And certainly the work that she has done, particularly for the Benedictine Abbey in Kubari, needs to be recognized and applauded for what she's been able to achieve. And I know that her funeral is either today or tomorrow. So again, I just want to express my deepest sympathies to the Catholic Church and to the members of the Benedict Abbey in particular for her loss. She will be sorely missed. Mr. Speaker, at this first sitting since the Republic of China Taiwan celebrated its 108th National Day anniversary celebrations on the 10th of October 2009, we take this opportunity to extend our congratulations to the government and the people of Taiwan and extend best wishes for their future peace and prosperity. St. Lucia values highly the friendship and the bilateral cooperation that have been steadily strengthening in recent years and remains committed to providing support at the diplomatic and international levels to Taiwan. Mr. Speaker, I was a guest of honor at Taiwan's National Day Parade, accompanied by the Honorable Stephenson King, the Minister of Infrastructure, Ports, Energy, and Labor, and the Senate President, the Honorable Jurody McIntyre. During our stay in Taiwan, the St. Lucia delegation held a series of high-level working meetings with President Tsai Ing-wen and leaders of government, business, and education to explore and strengthen the avenues of further cooperation and investment opportunities. The delegation also met with the St. Lucian students studying in Taiwan. The high-profile visit helped reinforce the strong cooperation and friendship between our two countries. During the entire period, the flags of Taiwan and St. Lucia were flown along the streets surrounding the presidential palace. As a first at the National Day Parade, St. Lucia participated with 3 most spectacular and colorful costumes from the prize-winning carnival band Adrian Ogier's Tribe of 12. Their presentation, AFOLAB, was named after the ancestral figure who bridges past, present, and future in Derek Walcott's poem, Omers. It is a triumphant visualization of the physical and emotional journey of our people across time and water, and celebrates that incredible triumph over the 3 centuries of adversity and our eventful and historic fight for freedom. The AFOLAB Kings and Queen, accompanied by costumed St. Lucian and Taiwanese revelers, paraded before the President, the Prime Minister, and other dignitaries, and then through the streets of Taipei. The group was preceded by St. Lucian and other students of allied countries in their respective national costumes. Such a spectacle had never before been witnessed at the National Day Parade in Taiwan, and has generated a considerable amount of media coverage and interest. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia's visibility and the richness of its culture talent were further enhanced during Taiwan's National Day celebrations as a delegation of St. Lucian artists led by our renowned Mr. Bu Hinkson, along with Emerson Nurse, Denzel Leon, Krista Bailey, Nikki Pamphil, and Irvin Lacotar, performed at the Taichung Jazz Festival, where they received an overwhelming reception. Mr. Speaker, my government remains committed to maintaining and strengthening the friendship and the cooperation between the government and the people of Taiwan and St. Lucia, and we look forward to the deepening of the collaboration and cooperation between our 2 nations. I take this opportunity again to extend congratulations and best wishes to the government and the people of Taiwan, and to reaffirm our friendship, support, and mutual cooperation.
Papers to be laid. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 126 of 2019, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, Number 12, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 129 of 2019, Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court Sentencing Guidelines Rules. Statutory Instrument Number 130 of 2019, 2015 Supplement to the Revised Edition of the Law's Commencement Order. Statutory Instrument Number 131 of 2019, Income Tax Exemption Trust Media Corporation Limited Order. Statutory Instrument Number 132 of 2019, Income Tax Exemption Public Sector Offices Order. Statutory Instrument Number 135 of 2019, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, Number 13 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 139 of 2019, Legal Profession Eligibility, Javille Augustin John, Order. Statutory Instrument Number 140 of 2019, International Business Companies Amendment Number 2 Regulations. Statutory Instrument Number 141 of 2019, Income Tax Exemption, Hunori International Airport Redevelopment Project Order. Statutory Instrument Number 143 of 2019, Banking, Republic Bank EC Limited and the Bank of Nova Scotia Banking Business Vesting Order. Statutory Instruments Number 145 of 2019, Excise Tax Amendment Schedule 1, Number 14 Order. Citizenship by Investment 2018-2019 Annual Report. Office of the Director of Audit, Performance Audit Report of the Maintenance of Government Buildings, August 2017. Office of the Director of Audit, Compliance Audit Report, Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project, DVRP, February 2018. Office of the Director of Audit, Performance Audit Report on the St. Lucia's Preparedness to Implement the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, July 2018.
Honorable Minister for Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following paper standing in my name. Statutory Instrument number 128 of 2019, Labor, Work Permit Fees, Exemption, Events Company of St. Lucia, Inc., order.
Honorable Minister for Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument number 136 of 2019, Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Designation of Inspectors Amendment Order. Statutory Instrument number 137 of 2019, St. Lucia National Housing Corporation, the Union Industrial Estate at Postlethwaite, Grosilley, vesting order.
Minister for Youth and Sports.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in the name of the Minister of Tourism, Information, Broadcasting, Culture, and Creative Industries. Statutory Instrument number 138 of 2019, Tourism Incentives, Nico's Touring Services Limited, order. Statutory Instrument number 142 of 2019, Tourism Stimulus and Investment, Coconut Bay Management Limited, order.
Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument number 125 of 2019, Price Control Amendment number 13, order. Statutory Instrument number 127 of 2019, Price Control Amendment number 14, order. Statutory Instrument number 133 of 2019, Free Zone Regulations. Statutory Instrument number 134 of 2019, Price Control Amendment number 15, order. Statutory Instrument number 144 of 2019, Price Control Amendment number 16, order.
Motions.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
Member for Castro Reserve.
Mr. Speaker, just on a point of order. Of course, provisions are not made to discuss documents that are tabled. But I needed to find out whether or not the law was changed not to include the names of persons who were granted citizenship under CIP in the annual report. In the previous two reports that I have, the list of names of all persons granted citizenship were included, but I cannot seem to find it. I know I had a very long weekend, Mr. Speaker, and I may not be seen quite clearly. I also note, Mr. Speaker, that the list of processing agents and authorized agents is not included in the report. And again, I'm trying to figure out whether the law has been changed, that the report now does not include those very important details that the legislation requires us to have.
Very well. Honorable Member, like you rightly said in your opening statement, I note the question and the point of order you're making, so I'm hoping that the relevant, at the appropriate time, you may want to make it a formal question, but at this present time, the answer you seek cannot be given to you because, as you rightly said, our standing order does not make provision for papers to be debated. Motions. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas under Section 109(1)A of the Value Added Tax Act, Cap 15.42, the Act, it is provided that the Minister responsible for Finance may, by order published in the Gazette, amend the schedules to the Act. And whereas it is further provided under Section 109(2) of the Act that an order made pursuant to Section 109(1) of the Act is subject to an affirmative resolution of Parliament, except where the amendment is made to the customs tariff headings only. And whereas the Minister responsible for Finance seeks approval of the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedules 1 and 3, order to amend Schedules 1 and 3 of the Act by affirmative resolution of Parliament. In the case of Schedule 1, under one item to include a definition for the words educational supplies, and under item 2.2 to include the supplier, the service of printing of educational supplies as a zero-rated supply of service. In the case of Schedule 3, to exempt imports of personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household commodities contained in barrels. Be resolved that the Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedules 1 and 3 order, which amends Schedules 1 and 3 of the Act. In the case of Schedule 1, under Item 1 to include a definition for the words educational supplies. Under Item 2.2 to include the supplying of printing of educational supplies as a zero-rated supply of service. In the case of Schedule 3, to exempt imports of personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household commodities contained in the barrels. This amendment before Parliament is an amendment to the VAT Act to zero-rate the service of printing. Educational supplies, as defined under the Value Added Tax Act 15.42, including newspapers, trade catalogs and advertising matter, magazines and books and patterns and samples with no commercial value, are treated as exempt supplies under the second schedule of the VAT Act. When those same items are, however, produced or printed locally for a third party, the production or printing thereof is treated as a service and subjected to the standard rate of VAT. So it means that we have manufacturers, Mr. Speaker, who by virtue of the existing legislation are prejudiced in their own country. The fact is that those items now can be imported and have no VAT on them, yet if in fact that those items are now produced in St. Lucia, they are VATable. And we truly believe that this was an error, because I cannot believe that either government would want to in any way prejudice any of its local manufacturers. Since the VAT Act exempts the importation of such goods as per Schedule 2, and that similar goods are subject to VAT when produced in St. Lucia, this is viewed as rendering the service of printing, such as of books, magazines, leaflets, and invitations in St. Lucia, more expensive than the cost of importing a similar printing service, and can render local suppliers of those services uncompetitive. So again, if in fact we are going to be printing books here in St. Lucia, magazines, leaflets, and invitations, they would be deemed as being a service item under our VAT Act, and as a result of it, be subject to VAT. Yet, if those same items are being imported from outside of St. Lucia, they are coming into St. Lucia VAT-free. It should be noted that goods as defined by educational supplies under the VAT Act that are imported will continue to be exempt from the VAT, while by zero rating the service of printing, the printing sector will be able to claim the total amount of the input tax expended monthly to compete with the imports of similar products. I hence submit for the consideration of this Honourable House this amendment. This amendment before Parliament of VAT Act Schedule 3 to exempt the payment of VAT. The Government of St. Lucia has once again approved concessions with regard to the import of barrels at Christmas. Concessions are for the period November 15th, 2019, to January 31st, 2020. The concessions on barrels are in accordance with the following terms and conditions: 100% waiver of import duty on personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household consumables contained in barrels. Electronics are explicitly excluded. The number of barrels qualifying for concessions is 2 per household. The upper limit of the value per barrel is EC $2,500 per barrel on the items qualifying for concessions. Qualifying items must be for personal use and not commercial use. The usual penalties and fines apply if the goods are used for commercial purposes. As is customary, the appropriate legal instrument is being tabled in this House, Honorable House, to allow for the exemption of value-added tax on all qualifying items, food, clothing, toys, household consumables, personal items, imported within the barrels during this period.
Honorable members, the question is that by affirmative resolution approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 1 and 3 order, which amends Schedule 1 and Schedule 3 of the Act. A, in case of Schedule 1, under Item 1 to include a definition for the words educational supplies. 2, under Item 2.2 to include the supply of printing of educational supplies as a zero-rated supply of service. B, in case of Schedule 3, to exempt imports of personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household commodities contained in barrels. Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the VAT exemption for barrels, which was an initiative of the St. Lucia Labour Party, and surprisingly the government has followed it, unlike many other initiatives. I also understand the reason, the thinking, what's behind the first amendment to the VAT Act, but that will remain for another show. But I did not expect, Mr. Speaker, to be here debating VAT. I thought VAT would have been eliminated.
Yes, yes.
I really thought that there would have been no VAT. 5 to stay alive, reduction of VAT, and the elimination. But as many things, this too shall pass. But Mr. Speaker, I also want to note that we are very liberal in our giving up of VAT revenue. I notice we've given 18 vehicles concessions at one sitting. 18 vehicles. I hope that the members of the taxi fraternity are aware that the government is very liberal in giving incentives for vehicles. It's very generous, since we've just given 18 vehicles to one company in one stroke. I hope other taxi drivers get the same. That's just a short intervention, Mr. Speaker. I support the motion, but I look forward to come here and to debate the complete elimination or the complete removal of VAT as promised by this government. I thank you.
Honorable Member for Castro South East.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the motion put forward by the Minister of Finance, the member for Mikud South, to create a more level playing field for our manufacturers. Since the introduction of VAT in this country, Mr. Speaker, we have come to this House on several occasions to make amendments to be able to adjust to some of the difficulties that we have encountered. And many businesses in St. Lucia have faced the challenge of being able to deal with this whole issue of VAT. Mr. Speaker, if we go back in time, I debated the VAT bill while in opposition. Unlike some people who said VAT was an oppressive tax, but when they came into the reins of power, they chose to implement the same VAT that was called an oppressive tax. Since this government came into office, Mr. Speaker, most times when we come to this honorable house to deal with the issue of VAT is to be able to reduce VAT and not increase VAT on the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, it is evident that the previous government introduced VAT at a rate of 15%. And when we debated the VAT bill, Mr. Speaker, the then Prime Minister and member for Viewfort South indicated that VAT was being introduced as a tax that should be revenue neutral. As a tax, and I remember, Mr. Speaker, and it's in Hansa, where I said to he said, I take full responsibility for the introduction of VAT. And I was sitting across, Mr. Speaker, and I said to him, I hope you will take responsibility for all the businesses that would be impacted and all the small businesses that would close as a result of the implementation of VAT at a rate of 15%. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition, member for Castries East, indicated that he finds it strange that this government would still be here debating about VAT. He thought that VAT would have been eliminated. Maybe, Mr. Speaker, he needs to tell the people of St. Lucia, as he tells them in so many other things, what will he do with VAT in government? That is what he needs to tell the people of St. Lucia. Because this government, Mr. Speaker, is sticking to what we promised the people of St. Lucia. And it is evident, Mr. Speaker, that the members opposite, when they debated the reduction of the 2.5%, they said we were giving up $54 million of revenue by giving up the 2.5% of VAT. Mr. Speaker, the documents are available, and they are aware that today, with the reduction of VAT under this administration from 15 to 12.5%, that the country is collecting more revenue from VAT today than it did under the 15% VAT under the previous administration. What is the cause of this, Mr. Speaker? It is that there is more confidence in the economy and there is more activity in the economy under this government than we had for 5 years under the previous government. Now, Mr. Speaker, the issue of manufacturing and the printing, and I know why the member was very brief. I know why he would not tackle this. I could, on this occasion, I could read the smiles, Mr. Speaker. Yes, there were some smiles on the other side. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, when the Labour Party was in government, every time they brought a motion to this house and they wanted to do something, it had somebody or it was geared towards particular individuals or persons that they wanted to benefit. But, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, today, when things come to this honorable house, we'll come to that. When things come to this honorable house, Mr. Speaker, this is a decision that is going to benefit the manufacturing sector in St. Lucia. Not just one individual. Mr. Speaker, I don't expect the members. I'm opening the door for you all to walk in. You all always like to walk in when the door is open. I dare you all to walk through that open door. Mr. Speaker, the issue of VAT and the issue of it's in the company's registry. Go and find out. The issue of VAT that we are dealing with here, Mr. Speaker. This government, every time we have come to this honorable house, Mr. Speaker, is to give a tax break or a tax relief to the people of St. Lucia. And I want to inform members opposite and the people of St. Lucia, by the next sitting of this house, I expect that we will come with the bill that we promised that the people should not have to pay VAT on funeral expenses. And Mr. Speaker, further to that, you know, imagine somebody cannot pay their light bill or they cannot pay their water bill. And when they are disconnected, they are still charged VAT on the reconnection fee. That needs to go also, Mr. Speaker. These are the things that we need to address as a government. That's going to bring the measure of relief that the people need. Because, Mr. Speaker, imagine your light bill is disconnected. You're struggling already to meet the payments, and you have to pay a 15% on the reconnection fee. So, Mr. Speaker, I applaud the leader of the opposition this morning for saying that he said he supported the barrel initiative because it was a Labour Party initiative. You know, we support things in this house because it's good for the people of St. Lucia. It does not matter where it originated from, Mr. Speaker. That is the difference with this government. That is the difference with this government. Mr. Speaker, if something is good for the people of this country, it doesn't matter which government. So you mean a government will come into office and you're not supposed to do anything good for your 5 years? Okay? So, Mr. Speaker, what we see happening day to day is further fulfillment of the promises made during the campaign of the United Workers' Party in opposition. Ask them, how many times have we come to increase taxes on the people of this country? 150 gas, and gas is still cheaper on the United Workers' Party government than it was on the Labour Party government. Mr. Speaker, anybody can go to the pump and know. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, I can understand why the members of
Honorable members, Mr. Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, allow the member for Castres Southeast to be heard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, when we look at, there's an overall plan. We are taking things in strides, but we are delivering on what we promised. We didn't promise pie in the sky, and when the time comes, you find reasons not to be able to deliver. Unlike some people, Mr. Speaker, They promised jobs, 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 and what the people got was unemployment. Unemployment went through the roof. They promised to grow the economy, and the economy was on decline for 3 consecutive years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, look at the situation. And in our worst decline, we still perform better than you for your entire 5 years. So, Mr. Speaker, I know members opposite are uncomfortable, Mr. Speaker, because when they look at the performance of this government, Mr. Speaker, if I was sitting over there and I saw a government performing as well as this government is performing, I would be concerned. We can go to the hospital, but we are not going. The hospital discussion will come. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of the VAT, because it is important that people understand. When this Labour Party introduced VAT, didn't they realize that they were giving the outside? Now listen, that's the government, Mr. Speaker, who speak about friends, family, and foreigners. But here's what they did, Mr. Speaker. When they introduced VAT, they introduced VAT in a manner that gave the foreign entities an edge over the local manufacturers. And that is the wrong that we are putting right in this honorable house today, Mr. Speaker. Because imagine the number of people in that service industry who, if you do not have the work going on, these people are unemployed. Can you imagine ordering something from overseas? It has no VAT, nothing attached to it. But if you produce it locally, so already we know that the price of electricity is higher than our competitors out there. We know that the size of our labor force is smaller. We know that our salaries are higher in a lot of instances than these places. So where do we compete? Where do we have the added advantage? If you wanted us to eliminate VAT, why did you introduce it in the first place? Is it because you said it was oppressive? So you meant to oppress the people of St. Lucia by introducing an oppressive tax. So you know, Mr. Speaker, it's easy for people to talk. Eliminate it. You said you'd eliminate it. Mr. Speaker, they said that it was oppressive. Yet still. So how do I conclude that? If you know something is oppressive and you decide that I am going to introduce it, what you are simply saying, I want to oppress the people of St. Lucia. And indeed and in fact, Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Lucia...
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, just keep the phone down a bit.
Mr. Speaker, indeed, the people of St. Lucia were oppressed for the years that Labour Party was in office. Now liberation has come, and every time we come to this house, we bring a greater measure of relief to the people of St. Lucia. And Mr. Speaker, they can make noise because that's all they can do. They can't deliver anything. Empty vessels make the most noise. And that's all they're good at, making noise. But Mr. Speaker, I know that the leader of the opposition has confidence that this government has the ability to eliminate VAT. Because that's why he is asking us to do it. Or do you want to give us a basket to go and carry water? I don't think so. You know the capacity and the capability to govern this country effectively is on this side of the house. So what you could not do, you want us to do. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the leader of the opposition that there are further reductions coming in taxes for the people of St. Lucia. Not just in the area of VAT, because that's what good governance is about. Striking the right balance so that your economy can grow sufficiently. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party overtaxed the people of St. Lucia and had the economy in a stranglehold. Go and ask the manufacturers out there. Go and ask them what they suffered when VAT. Can you imagine that, Mr. Speaker? When you bring in your input, and you have to pay all of that VAT up front. But these things are sitting in your warehouse for months. They have not been sold. But this cash is tied up. If you are using an overdraft facility for your cash flow, then your interest rate is high. How do you survive? So, it will be dealt with in due course. Like the leader of the opposition makes pronouncements on everything else. I hope he'll make a pronouncement on VAT. I want to hear him make a pronouncement on VAT. Because, Mr. Speaker, while they were in government, they were already thinking of increasing VAT to 17.5% or 18%. That was the discussion to meet the fiscal imbalance that was in the country. That is what they were planning. So that is why they marvel, Mr. Speaker, that this government can come in and can introduce 5 to stay alive. That is still baffling them. Ask them. You know what they came? They came with 15 to kill you. Ask them, where the 15 things they said they would have done? Where is it? They were in government for 15 years. They could not do one thing. But now they want to do 15 things in one term. So Mr. Speaker, the members opposite need to understand what good governance is about. Good governance is about striking the right balance, supporting your manufacturers, supporting your farmers, supporting all of the sectors of the economy that contributes to the growth and development. And if they want to doubt that, Mr. Speaker, if they think that reducing VAT was a bad decision, how did we grow the economy after reducing VAT? And revenue increased. But the tax on gas does not amount to the 52 million you said that you were giving up. You know, Mr. Speaker, that's why the maths on the other side have this country in the mess that it is today. They can never get the maths right. They got 50 million in the block box. Ask him. He was the Minister for Port Services. Ask him what he did with the 50 million for me, Mr. Speaker. The member for Castries East, when he came into government, before they stopped the money that was in the lockbox, they got 50 million. Ask him to account what he did with the 50 million. He was the Minister for Port. So, Mr. Speaker, I fully support the motion here today. And I believe it will bring some relief to the manufacturing sector. For my constituents, Mr. Speaker, I will narrow it down. The member said they introduced the barrel. I welcome whoever introduced the barrel. But every government that have come in since then have supported the barrel program for the season. You know I wasn't the one who said that. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the situation that we have before us with the barrels bring relief to a lot of people in St. Lucia. A lot of people who have family overseas. You know, the Christmas season is a season of goodwill, a season of giving, a season of sharing. And that is why I believe that this program is a very good program. And if you look at it, we have not narrowed the time limits. Because we realize, Mr. Speaker, the challenges that people have sometimes with shipping and with getting the things there in a timely manner. So the 15th of November gives you almost a month and a half before Christmas and a month after Christmas. That benefits all of the people of St. Lucia. But in particular, Mr. Speaker, it means a lot to me because I represent a large constituency and a lot of the people who would receive a barrel. Some of these things come for goodwill, Mr. Speaker. Not just that people bring barrels for themselves. A lot of the barrels that come in, Mr. Speaker, are things that are shared from community to community, from family to family. And that is a good initiative. Mr. Speaker, also included there are the toys that would be distributed. And I want to assure members opposite that when the toys get here, they will get their share of toys for distribution within their constituencies. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a period of goodwill.
We can always do it more.
Honorable Member for Vieux-Fort North.
Honorable Member, I said you will get your toys when the toys get here. Hold me responsible for that. Mr. Speaker, through you, I want to assure members opposite. I want to assure the members opposite. They will get...
Honorable members, we are approaching the time of goodwill and good cheer.
Mr. Speaker, I see the members want to misbehave at the side. The toys are for the children, not for you all. Okay? The toys are for the children.
Continue,
okay?
Honorable Member.
Mr. Speaker, I want to assure members that the initiatives being undertaken by this government is to help grow this economy more. Mr. Speaker, in life, you have to give in order to get. And that is the part of governance that the Labour Party did not understand. They were overtaxing the people, they were trying to take too much, and the economy was stifled. When you release the stranglehold on the economy, we have seen a much better performing economy. And I am confident that with the new initiatives that would be brought to this House, because I look forward to it, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to the relief on funerals, VAT exempt. I look forward to the next sitting of this House when we can deal with the VAT exemption for Lucia and Wasco for reconnection fees. Because these are the things that our people come to us and they talk about. So I am happy that the opposition supported this initiative today for the zero rating, and I look forward to their support when we will introduce further measures to reduce VAT and to bring greater relief to the people of St. Lucia. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member cast yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it looks like the Creole weekend had a devastating effect on some people in this House. And of course, we were pleased to see some of them resorting to bypass as a means of reconnecting with people. And I wish them the very best, Mr. Speaker, because the record of this government is so dismal that we had to get a lot of découché arguments brought before this House by the member from Castries South East. And I thought, Mr. Speaker, that we'd have a very short session today. Some of us are still trying to recover from the weekend, And the member from Castries East stood up and in less than 3 minutes expressed support for this motion on behalf of us. But instead, we had to have the member from Castries South East open some new wounds and open some new doors for us to walk through, Mr. Speaker. And it's interesting that the members continue to support the barrel program, and to hear the member express his support for it. When it was first introduced, it was criticized by members on the other side, saying that the Chamber of Commerce would be losing revenue. It was criticized. But that's water under the bridge, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I will excuse the member from Denris South. But we know that you have specifically prohibited the use of the word lie in this honorable chamber. But, Mr. Speaker, the member from Castries South spoke about the introduction of VAT. And just as the member from Denris South said that I lied to say that they had criticized the barrel program, let us go back as to how the VAT program was introduced into St. Lucia. Who signed the agreement for its introduction? Who set up the office with staff in it? We had a VAT office set up with full-time staff and doing no work because the members did not have the courage to do what they had agreed to do. And the former Prime Minister, member for Vieux South, said it's an oppressive tax. And in his judgment, he found himself in a situation where a previous UDP government had signed agreements to introduce VAT, set up the office and employed staff, but could not have introduced it. The present member for Miku South said that it is a good tax. He said so. It's a very good tax, and I can even get the clip and play it. And, Mr. Speaker, we really ought to have some audio-visual facilities in here so we can play back some of those statements. Because sometimes people have, selective amnesia. They forget the things they said before. But the fundamental issue is that the members opposite, on the other side, promised to remove VAT, to remove it. 3.5 years later, we come into the House to have an amendment for educational supplies. And we smile, because why would you just choose one particular area of manufacturing? And then he stands up, and like the saying goes, evil thinks what evil does. He believed we were smiling because we knew why they were doing it. Now, I must say I don't know why they're doing it, but he even spoke about one particular individual benefiting. I don't even know what he means, but maybe there is a story behind this VAT amendment that we're not even aware of. And I would love, Mr. Speaker, for him to tell us, who is that one individual who we are suspicious of will be the beneficiary of it? How? Who is it? Am I bringing the truth to light, Mr. Speaker? I don't know. I don't know. But the member has exposed something that is rather insidious, Mr. Speaker. But you know what? I support it. I support it, Mr. Speaker. And we made no bones about that. The leader of the opposition said he supported it, Mr. Speaker. But when are we going to get the elimination of VAT? And the member of Castries office says he's coming back to this House for further reduction on other items. Why not the elimination of VAT as promised in the Fight to Stay Alive and the manifesto? Why not? 3.5 years is gone. There'll probably be what? 1 or 2 more budgets, Mr. Member from Miku South? When are we getting the elimination of the VAT and its replacement with a sales tax? That is what was promised. And members opposite clap because they have amended one item on the VAT schedule. And the member from Castries office promises at the next sitting they will reduce a few more. Is it a few more that is carefully selected to benefit friends, families, and we used to say foreigners, but the members opposite are so brazen and bold, Mr. Speaker. They've changed foreigners to flambeaus. They are telling us their business is for F&F for true, but not foreigners. It's flambeaus they're taking care of. And Mr. Speaker, they invited 800 people. They say are all their friends, family, and flabos. 800. In this whole country, we were told 800 were invited. I know a lot of people in Castle South are not privileged to be part of the 800. But let's leave that for another day, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am looking forward to this House debating the tax regime which was announced in the budget. The Prime Minister in his budget address indicated that there will be a new tax regime from January 1st, I think it is. I'm waiting for it to be debated in this House, Mr. Speaker, because when the member from Castle South is so shamelessly can stand and talk about this government is doing so well, the country is so prosperous, I am waiting for us to come and discuss the changes to the tax laws of St. Lucia. Or maybe you don't need to come to Parliament to change the laws. Maybe it can be changed outside. But earlier this year, we debated in the budget statement some significant changes to tax laws in this country. And I'm waiting for the debate on that, because if you talk about making life better for the people of St. Lucia, I want to see how you're going to justify imposing these new tax laws, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member from Castle South spoke about governance, that this is the party that can ensure governance. And I asked myself, Mr. Speaker, where is the governance? A CIP report, Mr. Speaker. The law requires you to name everyone who becomes a citizen of St. Lucia in the CIP. Why is it not included? Isn't good governance also about transparency? The law says it has to be included. I have come to this honorable House and I have complained about persons who are non-nationals being made authorized agents and promoters. I have come to this House and there are people who have been made authorized agents, Mr. Speaker. And it's supposed to be listed in this book, and it's not listed. Why is it not listed? Did somebody not proofread this report before it comes out? Why was it listed in the two previous years? I have it, Mr. Speaker. And somehow or the other, my instinct told me something like this would happen today. So I carried the reports from the two previous years. And I only got my report this morning, but surely it's a glaring omission, Mr. Speaker. And you speak about governance, good governance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member speaks about toys and distributing toys for Christmas. I want to say to him that the people of Castle South East, they want jobs for Christmas. We will get toys, but the people want jobs. Jobs, Mr. Speaker. That is the most important thing, Mr. Speaker, because there are people throughout the constituency who cannot benefit from all the prosperity that the honorable member says exists in St. Lucia. Where is all that prosperity? Take a walk through the old cemetery. Take a walk through Fuasho, Banan, Monlatok, all across to Marigo. Where is the prosperity? Where is it? And I don't want you to come and share toys with me. I will get toys. I want you to create jobs, Mr. Speaker. The little STEP program, I'm sure everybody in there remembers STEP. STEP that the member from Microsoft criticized. But STEP now is only being done selectively. No toilets for the people to ease themselves, whatnot. But STEP is being done selectively. And even in my constituency, I see persons from neighboring constituencies doing STEP in the constituency. And then I have two persons in my constituency giving out clearing and debushing. Well, I only have two. I have one who is always worshipping and another.
Honorable member.
Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, when we speak about VAT and prosperity in this country and how good things are, the people want to feel the good. Who is feeling the good, Mr. Speaker? If all the amendments, who is feeling the good? And Mr. Speaker, one more at it. The Bassel Joseph Community Center, Mr. Speaker, was started as a CDP project under the last government. And it was stopped. It was stopped, Mr. Speaker. Last Christmas, a few persons from the neighboring constituency of South East came to do some work on it. Mr. Speaker, and the work has stopped again for about 9 months. So we need to see, Mr. Speaker, where is the prosperity that this VAT reduction will bring? Now, Mr. Speaker, the whole issue about the barrels, and this is a serious thing. There have been people who benefit from the barrels. You have relatives overseas, they will send a barrel to you.
Honorable members. Keep it down.
And they will send a barrel to you. But there are a lot of people who will not get barrels this Christmas. There are thousands of persons who were fired on the NICE program, who used to make a little cacadan through the STEP program for Christmas. They will not get barrels. What is going to be done for them? And that's an important question, and the member from Castries South East have to be able to explain how these people will have a wonderful Christmas. So yes, we support the barrel issue, Mr. Speaker, the reduction of the usual concessions given, but spare thought for those who will not get barrels. Spare thought for the mothers, the single mothers, who will not get any employment for the year, Mr. Speaker. And I think that's critical, Mr. Speaker. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the member from Castries South East spoke about the successes of this government. And I continue to be amazed. It is becoming so stale and such bold-faced baloney, Mr. Speaker, that you wonder, this is a government that promised in 2016 they'll build 5 hotels within the next year. Not one has started. Not one. There's not one project, Mr. Speaker, with all the reduction in VAT and all the prosperity that the other side can boast that they started, conceptualized, and implemented. Not one. Not one. There is a tax, a fuel tax, but whether the roads that have been built, my good friend, a member from Castries North, I'm tired of complaining about him, Mr. Speaker, because where are all the roads that are supposed to be built with the lockbox? And Mr. Speaker, the next sitting, I hope somebody places a question to ask for details on the lockbox. Where are the roads? Mr. Speaker, we were told that the airport, I stay in my constituency. Mr. Speaker, we were told that the hospital would be open immediately 3.5 years later. Where is the prosperity of all the VAT reduction that you're speaking of? I can tell you. From 2016, Mr. Speaker, it has, when you see, maybe that's...
Honorable member, do you need any protection?
No, I don't actually. I agree, if it's horses people riding, then you won't know how bad the roads are. But, Mr. Speaker, there are people suffering in this country, all jokes aside. It's going to be a miserable and terrible Christmas for a lot of St. Lucians. A lot of St. Lucians. Those who depended on the NICE, depended on the STEP, there'll be nothing for them. Yet we are told there is so much prosperity taking place in this country. Who is enjoying that prosperity? I know it's not in my constituency. I know that. So can I ask the honorable member from Castries South East, don't give toys, give jobs. Let us take care of the toys. Thank you very much.
Honorable member for Swazel Saltibus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the minister responsible for the manufacturing sector, I feel duty-bound to stand and give my support to the motion laid by the Honorable Prime Minister. But Mr. Speaker, just before I, albeit very briefly, make my contribution, my very good friend from Castries South, in good jest, he indicated that I was bipartisan. I'm hoping the FRC will forgive me for crucifying the Creole. Maybe the member from Beaufort North could give me the correct manner to express it. But it indicated that when I was bipartisan and connecting with my people, but I will return the good jest, and while I was with my people, I know he was in the land of many rivers, dancing to destiny. So I think we both had a good weekend. But Mr. Speaker, you know, as one of the newest members of Parliament, it always amuses me as to how, depending on what side of the house that you sit, that you speak a different, or you sing a different song. And so, you know, it's, when I heard the leader of the opposition speak to, you know, the reduction, and he was trying to indicate that he recognized that there may be some intention by this government with regards to the motion, but he said he would leave it for a later, another show. You know, I just had to smile, Mr. Speaker, because you cannot be, on one hand, expressing that government is not doing sufficient for our local enterprise, including manufacturing, and then on the other hand, you want to single out or you want to speak against, you know, an incentive that the government is trying to give. And I think we all, as members of Parliament, should support the motion raised by the Honourable Prime Minister. VAT has its role, Mr. Speaker. I am very certain that VAT has its role that it has to play. But we must recognize that in the whole VAT system, there are areas that has to be worked on. There are areas that have to be fine-tuned, particularly as it appears our local people, our manufacturers, our local artisans. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be right. It cannot be right that our local manufacturer could produce an item and yet still you can get that very same item coming from overseas at a much lower cost. It cannot be right. We have to ensure that we look after our people first. And it's a step. It's a gradual step, Mr. Speaker, that we looked at areas where our local manufacturers, our local people are under tremendous pressure because other regions, other areas, because of the incentives they may be receiving there, because of the cost of fuel, etc., they're able to produce things at a much lower rate, and then therefore our people become uncompetitive. So, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the motion laid by the Prime Minister, because I believe it is one step forward in ensuring that our manufacturers become a lot more competitive. Mr. Speaker, I will move very briefly into the other aspect of the motion, which was the Christmas barrel concessions, Mr. Speaker. And I'm extremely happy that another year has come and the government has seen it fit to continue to follow the trend of giving the Christmas barrel concessions, because we all recognize it is much needed throughout the country. Many of our people, particularly in the rural areas, depend on these barrels from their families overseas, and you know, these barrels, they look forward to receiving it to bring a lot joy for the festive season. So I welcome our continued support to the Christmas barrel concession. Mr. Speaker, with that being said, I want to thank you very much, and I support fully the motion laid by the Honourable Prime Minister. Thank you.
Member for Denrinoff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like the leader of the opposition before me, I want to rise in support of the motion as presented by the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, at this time of year, a lot of my constituents in Denrinoff look forward to receiving barrels from overseas. The data in the Ministry of Finance and other social agencies will tell us that remittances contribute significantly to the community economy in some pockets of St. Lucia. And Denrinoff happens to be one of them.
Ever since we saw the demise of the banana industry, Mr. Speaker, residents or constituents of Denry North have been relying very heavily on relatives and friends from abroad to help them meet their daily challenges. And as the Christmas season approaches, there are hundreds of families in my constituency who look forward to receiving those barrels containing toys and other personal items. And whereas some persons in St. Lucian society today have the luxury of hopping on an aircraft and going to Miami and other big cities to shop, Mr. Speaker, there are quite a few persons who do not enjoy such luxuries, and so they must rely on those barrels. And when the initiative was first introduced to waive VAT and other taxes on those barrels, Mr. Speaker, I was not in government, but the St. Lucia Labour Party administration that brought it into this parliament to make it happen must be commended. Mr. Speaker, je le dis en créole, et que vous quittez moi faire ça, nous sommes en mois célébration créole. Je vais supporter l'émotion que le Premier ministre a menée à Caille Concile bon matin. Que nous avons fait changement en rôle by VAT là. Et que ce changement nous avons fait bon matin, c'est pour quitter les gens qui ont recevé barrel qui a sorti de l'Amérique et puis l'autre place pour joindre ces barrels de la manière que vous ne pouvez pas payer un shy tax laisser ces barrels là arriver cette liste. Nous savons là les gens, Mr. Speaker, cette liste qu'on nous a parlé, qui Jacques a fait plan pour aller à l'aéroport, il a payé étiquette pour aller shop pour Noël. Et pour mener les familles qui ont acheté Miami et puis l'autre côté. Et aussi, nous n'avons pas mis nous cette liste, les gens qui passent même ni assez l'argent pour acheter un livre dans le pays cette liste. Et quand pile ces gens qui dépend de les familles qui ont resté dans l'autre pays, pour voir barrel qui ni commission hard toys et puis l'autre bagaille, côté qui ont ni en saison Noël qui est un bit confortable pour eux. Et c'est pour raison ça, Mr. Speaker, je vais debout dans les pieds pour supporter le changement ça nous avons fait un barrel. But Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me to just speak to the concessions as they relate to the barrels and not at least briefly visit some of what was said by colleagues on the other side. The member for Castries Southeast, Mr. Speaker, who spoke immediately following the leader of the opposition. One would have thought that he would have joined, quite apart from joining the leader in supporting the motion, Mr. Speaker, he would see the motion and the contribution of the leader of the opposition for what it is. But instead, Mr. Speaker, he saw an opportunity once again to score political points. And in what has become characteristic of him in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, it was another serving of what we call découché. The same things we keep on hearing all the time. Jobs, jobs, jobs. We could not govern. We have not done anything for the people of St. Lucia. And Mr. Speaker, he said something which I believe was very, very, very poor taste. He gave the impression that any time a St. Lucia Labour Party administration came to the parliament to initiate discussion on legislation or amending schedules, those were always meant to benefit specific people. I believe that was in poor taste, Mr. Speaker. We will not, on this side, stoop to that low, Mr. Speaker, to advance our argument. But a member for Castries South, he made a very, very important point when he said that notwithstanding the initiative for the barrel is supposed to ameliorate the conditions for the average St. Lucian, Mr. Speaker, that notwithstanding, there are scores and hundreds of St. Lucians on the eve of Christmas who do not know, Mr. Speaker, how they are going to survive. Mr. Speaker, the member for Choiseul said that it is unfair for imported materials to get preferential treatment, I'm paraphrasing, over what is produced locally. And I support that, Mr. Speaker. There should never be an instance where an imported item that can be produced in St. Lucia ought to be getting treatment or enjoy conditions that the locally produced items will not get. But what he did not tell you, Mr. Speaker, is that VAT is not the only factor responsible for local items being more highly priced than what is imported. And so we on this side of the house, irrespective of who stands to benefit, because we understand, Mr. Speaker, that the manufacturing sector has a contribution to make to the development of this country. And if this country is going to develop economically, Mr. Speaker, the chances of the people of Denry North receiving what is rightfully theirs in the scheme of governance will be improved. So if this amendment to the legislation is supposed to benefit the manufacturing sector, we on this side have absolutely no problems with that. And in a personal Denry North capacity, Mr. Speaker, I will provide all the necessary support that is needed to ensure that this happens. But what I cannot fathom, Mr. Speaker, and what is distasteful, is when an opportunity presents itself for objective and constructive discussion. When that happens, Mr. Speaker, members instead prefer to, as the artist would say, pencher and then skew the discussion in a manner where they believe it is going to give them political favor. Mr. Speaker, it has long been said and noted that there is a propensity on the part of politicians to campaign in poetry and to govern in prose. On the campaign trail, we say one thing. And when we find ourselves in government, Mr. Speaker, the reality that confronts us most of the time is one where we have to rethink our positions on issues of national development and do things contrary to what we said we would have done. And there's absolutely no problem with that. But we have to be man and woman enough to come in this chamber and tell the people of St. Lucia that on the campaign trail, it was convenient for us to have said at the time, because it was going to lend us votes, that we were going to remove VAT. And that VAT was not a good thing for St. Lucia. That is what was said. Mr. Speaker, I entered the political fray in 2011. And the discussion about VAT was there long before I entered. I remember driving on Manuel Street, and there was office space for the VAT unit. There was furniture costing hundreds of thousands of dollars for the VAT office prior to the general elections of 2011. That was the work of the United Workers' Party administration. And, Mr. Speaker, all the mechanisms were already put in place for the implementation of that. When we came in as a government, we carried through with all the recommendations that had been made, Mr. Speaker. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? It is sad and even shameful, Mr. Speaker, for someone to come in this house in his capacity as an honorable member and make it seem as if VAT was a creation of the St. Lucia Labour Party administration. And in addition to the United Workers' Party, Mr. Speaker, putting all the mechanisms in place for the implementation of VAT, today, Mr. Speaker, they want to have us on the defensive for VAT. You were on the campaign trail as a political party, and you said that you were committing to the total removal of VAT. Lève la beauté à campagne. Yo dit, Mr. Speaker, that c'était désir pour tirer VAT nettement comme un système taxe en pays cette Lucie. And we are already inside the 4th year of this administration's life. The 1st year is completely gone. The 2nd year is finished. The 3rd year finished. We are inside the 4th year. And instead of members opposite profiting a golden opportunity to come and tell us how advanced they are with their plans for the removal of VAT, they come, Mr. Speaker, and they try to put a political spin on it to make it seem as if it is the St. Lucia Labour Party that has a problem, and we were the ones who implemented VAT and made things hard for the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, 2.5% of revenue foregone. And if, Mr. Speaker, the government can find a mechanism tomorrow to totally remove VAT, I will be happy. If the government can reduce taxation to new levels in this country where the average St. Lucian is going to benefit, I will be happy with that. But you don't come here because it is politically expedient, and it is the politics of it that is bad. you reduce the VAT by 2.5%. Si gouvernement flambeau ça là, ça vini un caille constitution jour et dit nous yo ka tirer VAT nettement Mr. Speaker. Nous tous qui ici en les side opposition, nous ka supporter ça. Mais pas venir ici et qu'on ka fait bagaille, qu'on ka fait pour gagner un vote et puis qu'on ka connaître moun et demain on ka venir dire nous c'est même opposition qui te fait le ouais et c'est pour ça payer en condition hier. When you reduced it to 2.5% on the surface, it looked good. If you had taken it out completely, that would have been excellent. But you reduce that by 2.5%, you forego approximately $60 million, and every other weekend you come into this house to borrow the same money that you decided to forego because it looks good in the eyes of the electorate. When are we going to have a frank discussion in here, Mr. Speaker, on those issues? And then they tell you that things are okay. People ought to be happy. That is not the case in my constituency, Mr. Speaker. The people of Dennery North are not benefiting from those programs. And I have no guarantee, no hope, no confidence that any changes we make in this house will be down to the benefit of my constituents. You know how many of them went back to the farms to plant bananas? Because they were promised, Mr. Speaker, that there will be new markets for them in the French territory. And today it pains me to see grown men waking up at 5 in the morning to go on those farms. And when the banana is ready for harvest, they have to feed it to pigs or allow it to rot on the ground. And I'm supposed to come in here, and there are many of you on this side who represent constituencies that are similar to mine, rural constituencies. But it's convenient for you to sit, stay quiet, do not speak against those ills. But I'll tell some of you something, through you, Mr. Speaker. Some of you have served this country with distinction. Your legacy and reputation for some of you is on the line by association. And you need to check yourselves. So, Mr. Speaker, whereas I support this particular amendment to the VAT legislation, I want to state, Mr. Speaker, that I am not altogether convinced. I am not altogether convinced that this government, as they had promised us in relation to VAT, will remove the VAT completely off the backs of St. Lucians as they claim. But in terms of the barrel, Mr. Speaker, I know the people of Oleon, Belmont, Gadet, Larissus, Lapel, Richford, Grand Ravine, Denier Riviere. They are anticipating the arrival of their barrels. And some of them, Mr. Speaker, they're not even in a position, especially the elderly, to organize transportation to collect the barrels. And we have put a program in place in constituency to assist them with transportation and whatever other logistical problems they may have to receive their barrels. I said at the beginning of my presentation, Mr. Speaker, that remittances contribute significantly to the rural Dennery North economy. Un pile moun ka dépend tous les semaines, tous les fortnights, tous les mois pour aller Western Union et MoneyGram pour un petit argent pour aider like bill et puis l'autre basic expenses. And when it is quote-unquote barrel season, Mr. Speaker, a lot of them wait in anticipation, hoping that they will get that call. And don't take that lightly, you know. As I said earlier on, there are a lot in our society who can hop on the plane, go to Miami to shop, and get all what they desire for the holiday season. But on the contrary, Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of persons in St. Lucia today, especially the rural parts, who cannot make ends meet. And it is those barrels that they are anticipating, those barrels they are waiting, those barrels they are hoping to receive to provide some measure of comfort for them during this holiday season. Mr. Speaker, with these few words, I bring my contribution to this motion to an end.
Honorable Member for Ancillary Tanneries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise, Mr. Speaker, to add my voice to the bipartisan support, which is rather unusual today, to this motion, Mr. Speaker, both in support of the amendment being proposed by the Honorable Prime Minister for the VAT legislation, which, Mr. Speaker, for a long time has actually discriminated against local manufacturers. And really, Mr. Speaker, goes deep to hundreds of jobs all over St. Lucia. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not the only thing that was wrong with the VAT bill, as was proposed by the St. Lucia Labour Party. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to debunk the argument espoused here today, which seems to suggest that because the United Workers' Party government had set up the VAT office, that it was holding a gun to the SLP's head to say, go ahead and implement the VAT rate at 15%. But, Mr. Speaker, like everything else, the St. Lucia Labour Party and the members opposite do not take responsibility for the decisions that they make. And even, Mr. Speaker, when those decisions would have had untold consequences on the economy of St. Lucia, on the development of the country, on people's jobs, as in the case of VAT, Mr. Speaker, they celebrate the very harsh and very onerous implementation of the VAT rate at 15%. Mr. Speaker, I have seen nowhere in literature, I have seen no legislation that was signed by the then Minister of Finance, who is now the member for Castries North, which suggests, Mr. Speaker, that the VAT rate had to be 15%, that it had to discriminate against local manufacturers, that it had to cause many jobs to be lost, and that it had to, Mr. Speaker, give foreign manufacturers an edge over our local manufacturers. Mr. Speaker, what this seeks to do is a broader plan by our government, as been stated here today, Mr. Speaker, to adjust the tax system in St. Lucia so that the people of St. Lucia can enjoy more of their returns, more money. Businesses, Mr. Speaker, can have more breathing rooms in their ability, Mr. Speaker, to do business and to grow the economy. Mr. Speaker, the economics has been espoused here. I heard the member for Dennery South suggesting that we lost 2.5% of revenue. Dennery North, sorry. Decrying, Mr. Speaker, that decision. But what happened in that year, Mr. Speaker? We actually collected more VAT in that year, Mr. Speaker, when we reduced the VAT rate by 2.5%. So clearly what we saw was that the policy did work. People had more money in their pocket, despite everything that they have tried to say, which suggested that it didn't go down to the ordinary man on the street. But consumption certainly improved. We collected a lot more VAT, Mr. Speaker, in the following years, which resulted in that. And so, Mr. Speaker, a lot of falsehoods continue to be spewed by the members. Mr. Speaker, this here is a responsible approach to the development or to the refinement of the VAT legislation. Mr. Speaker, there have been numerous calls across the chamber today that we should remove VAT and eliminate it immediately. Mr. Speaker, we made no such promise. What we did say, and listen carefully, because, you know, there are members on this side who love to twist the truth. And I'm going to quote the Prime Minister, because I was in the very same campaign, I was in the same meeting, and what he said, that we will do the immediate reduction and the eventual elimination of VAT. And so, Mr. Speaker, we didn't give a timeline to say that we were going to eliminate VAT immediately. We said the immediate reduction,
Mr. Speaker,
and which is what we did. Yeah, go on.
The Honourable Member is misleading the House, and I would like to quote from the Manifesto of the United Workers' Party to say exactly what was said, Mr. Speaker. And I have a clipping of it. Going, gone. We will immediately reduce the rate of VAT with a view to further reducing it until it is completely replaced by a more appropriate and affordable sales tax within our first 5 years.
within your first 5 years.
Mr. Speaker, I see that English is not the preferred language of this Parliament. Some members have difficulty understanding. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to make it clear again. What I said, Mr. Speaker, what I said, Mr. Speaker, is this. I said, to quote the Prime Minister, where the announcement was made at the rally in the William Peter Boulevard, mirrors exactly what you've just said. I said the immediate reduction and the eventual elimination. But of course, it's political season. And so any single thing, Mr. Speaker, anything they can do to try to mislead the people of St. Lucia, they will do it. And there we go. There's nothing different. There's no need for a point of order. Oh my goodness. Mr. Speaker, the people who circulate the biggest degrees are the ones who have the biggest problem comprehending simple English language. And so, Mr. Speaker, to quote the member from Castries South, he's quite correct. A responsible approach was always what we suggested. And it is the immediate reduction. And, Mr. Speaker, within our first year of coming into power, Mr. Speaker, in assuming office, we realized that many families were finding it very tough, Mr. Speaker, with the VAT rate at 15%. And, Mr. Speaker, had it not been for the precarious fiscal position
Honorable members,
which we had inherited from them, we would have been in a better place to make even further cuts on the VAT. But today, Mr. Speaker, is a clear indication of our commitment and our determination and our belief in what we said in this, that the rate of VAT which they had implemented, Mr. Speaker, was, to use the former Minister of Finance, oppressive to the poor people of this country. Mr. Speaker, it was oppressive to businesses. Mr. Speaker, it was oppressive to the development of St. Lucia. And, Mr. Speaker, it was a cord around their necks. And we, Mr. Speaker, continue to make a number of important reforms, Mr. Speaker, to bring it about, whereby, yes, Mr. Speaker, you're getting some revenue, but there's also creating more space for the economy of this country to breathe, for business people to have confidence in the environment within which they operate, for business people to have confidence in the tax regime of this country. And, Mr. Speaker, what have we seen with the implementation of some of our reforms? Mr. Speaker, 3% economic growth, something that you haven't heard about in a very long time. 1 point odd economic growth. And, Mr. Speaker, there's more good news that we will be announcing come the next budget. Because the numbers, Mr. Speaker, show very clearly that this government and its tax reforms is in the right shape. Mr. Speaker, as Tourism Minister, I am extremely pleased, and I welcome this opportunity. Because, Mr. Speaker, what obtained with the Tourist Board in the future, in past years, and what obtained presently, is that you always have to look at your limited amount of monies that you have, your budget, and you have to make a comparison between printing locally and printing brochures to promote St. Lucia in Miami. And now, Mr. Speaker, while we have tried our very best to support local businesses, now with this, Mr. Speaker, we are in a better position to print our brochures which promote St. Lucia locally and give those businesses, Mr. Speaker, the best opportunity at bidding for those jobs. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am extremely delighted and pleased. And it is not lost on us the nexus that is supposed to happen between tourism and all of our economic value chain. And, Mr. Speaker, the publishing and the printing industry is no exception, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member, Honorable Member for Answer Reconnaissance needs to be heard.
It's okay, Mr. Speaker.
You may
Empty
proceed.
vessels make the most noise. It's all right. So, Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, And as we were conversing, and if you notice, I'm ignoring him today. He's under a lot of pressure. There's a lot going on that side, but I leave that for another day. I understand, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do not take it personal, but I thank you for your protection. I understand that there's a certain temperature that is taking place in the politics of the Labour Party at the moment that makes the leader of the opposition extremely nervous. So that's okay. But Mr. Speaker, back to the substantive matter that we're debating. Back to the substantive matter. And the substantive matter here, Mr. Speaker, is we are giving local businesses the strongest possible support. Mr. Speaker, we have another opportunity to create that nexus between manufacturing and tourism. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is good news for the local publishing business. Mr. Speaker, one of the opportunities we have missed, and I see that books are outlined as part of the list of items, is that we make the mistake of allowing global companies, and you know them well, you see their logo on the books that we give to our school kids. We facilitate those books, Mr. Speaker, textbooks in this case I'm making reference, to come into St. Lucia tax-free. But those books, Mr. Speaker, are printed a lot of times for Latin America, the Caribbean, they're printed for Africa, and they have a very global outlook, Mr. Speaker. And we have missed the opportunity to infuse more specificity as it relates to our cultural nuances, our cultural reality, and as well, Mr. Speaker, giving local companies a good opportunity to have a shot at printing those books. And so here is another layer that this tax is adding, Mr. Speaker, towards the education development of St. Lucia, but also and most importantly, the economic development of St. Lucia. So, Mr. Speaker, it has my wholehearted support. The Prime Minister is in the right direction with this bill. Mr. Speaker, of course, I want to also add my voice to the enormous opportunity that exists for my constituents with the continuation of the Christmas barrel regime, Mr. Speaker. And so I'll speak to you in the right time, don't you worry. I have a lot of Creole phrases for you. Don't you worry. Don't you worry, my friend. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, before I was rudely interrupted by the member for Castries South, who cannot keep quiet. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to add my voice to support the Christmas barrel regime. Mr. Speaker, I'm in a constituency where a number of my constituents are on the receiving end of remittances, and I know that this will go very far, Mr. Speaker, in making sure that they get a good Christmas, and it will go very far, Mr. Speaker, in ensuring that the families of my constituency have a happier time. So, Mr. Speaker, again, my deepest commendation for this bill, and we are in a very good place and moving on the right track. Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much for your indulgence.
Member for Fifth Ward North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I suspect many of us did not come here to debate today, but the events of the last few minutes have caused me to go very far and deep to research history, to put a few things right in this House, Mr. Speaker. This whole debate on VAT and the oppressive 15% as is being proposed by the other side, and the debate about who put VAT and who said it was oppressive and who set up structures and so on, Mr. Speaker, I want you, Mr. Speaker, to give me a little time. Because first of all, Mr. Speaker, I will read an NTN speech on 7th December 2009 by the former Prime Minister and now member for Castries North. I'll read the whole thing. I will also read, Mr. Speaker, 2 pages of the speech given by the former Prime Minister, the late Sir George Melvin Compton, on VAT. And I really want you to give me the time, Mr. Speaker, because there are times people come into this house, especially members opposite, the member for Castries South East, and I heard the member for Ancillary Canneries, and it is to parade and to play, Mr. Speaker. But I'm going to read, and I want those who are listening on television and who are watching to go to the NTN website and get the 7th December 2009 report, a speech by the former Prime Minister, the member, now member for Castries North. And I also want them to go to the website, go to the internet, and get the 2007 budget address by Sir George Melvin Compton. And I have an hour, so I'm going to take my full hour, Mr. Speaker, to go over these parts, to go over these speeches, and allow the people, because apparently some members inside of there believe that they can just come and fool people. I want the people to read for themselves. Don't just listen to me, the member for Vieux-Fort North. Read for yourself. And I wish to pause probably for a little second to allow members inside of there and people outside to get their computers. And I quote the first one. It's a speech given by the now member for Castries North. And we are going to find out where the 15% came from. And so if now you are a government who believe that your 15% was too rough, and you take it out, say so. Because I'll tell you where the 15% came from. December 7th, 2009. And I quote, "Ladies and gentlemen," and this is from the member of Parliament for Castries North, former Prime Minister, the former leader of the United Workers' Party. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to announce that the Cabinet of Ministers, at its meeting on 18th November 2009, approved a number of policies related to the implementation of the value-added tax in St. Lucia. Before I give details on the approved policies, let me provide you with some brief background information to the introduction of VAT in St. Lucia. You will recall that discussions on the introduction of VAT within the OECS started as early as 2003. This policy was reiterated in the 2007-2008 budget address by the former Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, the Honorable Sir John Compton. In fact, by introducing the VAT, the government of St. Lucia is abiding by the decision taken in July 2003 by the Monetary Council, the highest decision-making body of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, to approve the implementation of VAT in the ECCU as recommended by the OECS tax commissioners. Since the decision of the Monetary Council, Antigua, Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines have already implemented VAT, while St. Kitts and Nevis, like St. Lucia, is preparing to do so soon. Grenada has already committed to implementing the VAT in February 2010. The rate is coming. As stated by the then Prime Minister in the 2007 budget, meaning the late Sir John Compton, and as has been repeatedly emphasized by the VAT implementation team, the VAT will not be an additional tax, but will replace a number of other indirect taxes. Cabinet, by conclusion, number 1074 of 29th November 2007, approved the establishment of the Value Added Tax Implementation Project Office, the Value Added Tax Implementation Project Office, with the mandate to prepare St. Lucia for the implementation of a VAT system in the most effective manner. The staff of the project office has done a tremendous amount of work in educating the public on VAT and how the new system works. However, specific information on how the new system will affect individual taxpayers have not been disclosed, as the VAT policies were only recently approved by the VAT Steering Committee and Cabinet. With the approval of the VAT policies, the project office will now be in a position to meet the various stakeholders, including the business community, trade unions, churches, sports and social clubs, and other community organizations, to explain in precise terms how the VAT works and the likely impact on the membership of these organizations. As part of the public sensitization, Cabinet has mandated that the staff of the project office demonstrate the impact of the VAT on the prices of a typical basket of goods and services, so that the public will be better informed of how VAT is likely to impact on them. A white paper has been prepared for public consultation and will be used in disseminating information on the VAT policies during the consultation. I take this occasion to ask members of the public to avail themselves of the opportunity to be educated about VAT and to ask the pertinent questions at the various presentations. Ladies and gentlemen, government views the introduction of VAT as part of its strategic policy response in modernizing the tax system and thereby building the resilience of the economy to vulnerability and external shocks. The need for this strategic approach has become even greater in light of the impact of the global recession, which calls for greater resilience in the structure of our economy and to build a fiscal space necessary for government to produce the kind of policy response required. The VAT has been proposed as the preferred option, as this tax is considered a more efficient, simplified, and modern form of indirect taxation. The VAT, which is a tax on consumption, is a broad-based tax resulting in increased revenue and reductions in relatively high tax rates. The policies that have been approved I continue to quote, Mr. Speaker. The policies that have been approved by Cabinet are as follows. 1. A standard VAT rate of 15% and a rate of 0% for goods and services in the zero-rated list. These goods and services include goods produced for export and agricultural inputs. A VAT registration threshold for companies transacting businesses to the value of EC 120,000 per annum. The replacement of the following taxes and fees with VAT: consumption tax, motor vehicle tax, cellular phone tax, environmental levy. Exemption from the payment of VAT on a list of supplies, including basic food items, financial services, medical services, prescription drugs or medicines, transportation with a driver, among others. Mr. Speaker, unquote. The rest of it is there. But I wish to make the point, Mr. Speaker, that here we have members of the same party. They're standing as if, you know, they have nothing to do with VAT. It's all the Labour Party. And the Labour Party put 15% VAT and all of that. Here I have quoted one of the senior members who was deep in the belly of the implementation of VAT. You heard the words, Mr. Speaker. He was the Minister for Finance. All I'm saying to you If you have decided that you have a change of heart, say so. Don't come here pretending as if you had nothing to do with that. That's my point. My point is not that you cannot change your mind. My point is stop being hypocritical about this thing. This is my point in this honorable house. And I have more quoting. The Prime Minister said I have 40 minutes. I'm going to use every single minute of it. Because now, Mr. Speaker, I will go to the quotes from the former Prime Minister, which really gave the underlying basis and all of the reasons for the United Workers' Party government why they thought they should introduce VAT. So don't, that's my point, you know, Mr. Speaker. Don't come here pretending as if you had nothing to do with it. Come here and say, yes, we put everything in place, you introduced it, you came to Parliament, but we believe that the 15%, which we suggested at the time, and so we're changing it. But don't try to bamboozle the people of St. Lucia. I never said that. You hear what you want in the left ear. You hear what you want through the left ear. And I'm also going to quote, Mr. Speaker. In a while, I'm coming with the VAT white paper by the United Workers' Party. They have a whole white paper. And to justify things, the white paper started by saying VAT started in 1948. I have all that there, you know. I've told him I don't do it on my records. Everything is here. So let us go to Sir John, the deceased Sir John George Melvin Compton. And, you know, they speak so eloquently about him. Sometimes. When they don't want to juke his memory in the back. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, I think it's very important as a parliamentarian, as a member of Parliament for Viewfort North, even if those opposite don't care and suck their teeth, for my constituents to understand the history of this thing. And I've given them the sources. It's not just on my phone. It is on the internet. Go and look for it. I want to quote, Mr. Speaker, the former Prime Minister, who was leader of the United Workers' Party in 2007. And I want to quote where he spoke about VAT. Because I want to lay the basis for the foundation arguments about VAT. We can talk about changing our minds, that's okay. But let us lay the ground rules, the basis for the arguments. On pages 41 and 42 of the 2007 budget address by former Prime Minister deceased Sir John George Melvin Compton. And I quote, Madam Speaker, this is Sir John George Melvin Compton speaking in 2007, right here. I was in the House at the time, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker, and I quote, while we apply all of the debt containment and debt management strategies of this administration, we will be able to realize economic growth. This government will seek to grow the economy at an accelerated rate to increase the size of the GDP while ensuring that there is equity in the distribution of the benefits from that growth. Madam Speaker, if, as we anticipate, we are able to grow the economy while containing the level of debt, we will effectively reduce debt to GDP ratio, bringing it down to well within the prudential limits. Tax reform and fiscal planning, Madam Speaker, I wish to highlight at this point that St. Lucia is confronted with major issues relating to rising fiscal deficits and a burgeoning debt stock. If not addressed immediately, this could stymie the very growth and development that we are embarking on. A comprehensive fiscal stabilization and reform program is required to correct these growing imbalances and to place St. Lucia on a more sustainable path towards growth and development. Sir John Compton continues. In this regard, this government will undertake a comprehensive review of our tax system in order to improve our fiscal situation, reduce debt, and onerous debt service burden. This proposed tax reform will seek to ensure a system fairer and more equitable. Madam Speaker, in these days of globalization, with the impact of the WTO rules and the CSME, the economy must change, and so too must the tax systems that regulate it. The leader of the opposition is no stranger to this requirement. Indeed, as Minister of Finance, in his budget address of 2003-2004, he reported to this Honorable House that he had received a copy of the OECS tax reform report prepared by Sir Alistair McIntyre, which was commissioned by the Monetary Council in 2002. This report advised that in light of the shrinking tax base on imported goods and services from WTO arrangements to which they have subscribed, the governments of the OECS should move to a value-added tax. Again, in his 2006-2007 budget presentation to the then Minister of Finance, returned to the subject under the heading Changing Tax Policy Environment. He indicated that government had commissioned a review of the report by a group of citizens and that the report would be released soon for public scrutiny. To date, this important report has not been released. The then Minister of Finance drew attention to the need for tax reform, which he indicated should have been undertaken 3 years previously, but as usual, he procrastinated, said that the matter of tax reform will be considered after election. Although the people of St. Lucia did not give him the opportunity, Madam Speaker, the then Minister of Finance indicated that he would analyze the decision of the OECS on this matter, but they certainly did not wait for him. Dominica introduced VAT in March 2006, Antigua in January 2007, St. Vincent and the Grenadines will act in May, and both Grenada and St. Kitts will be introducing the system later this year. St. Lucia stands on a burning deck while all but she hath fled. That's the quote of the former Prime Minister. I want to just repeat that. St. Lucia stands on the burning deck while all but she have fled in relation to that. But we must get in step with our neighbors and stop playing the political game with so important an initiative. That's Sir John George Melvin Compton. The National Economic Council, appointed to advise government on this matter in April, advised government to adopt a broad-based consumption of value-added tax. Madam Speaker, we have 2 choices: to keep our tax system unchanged and suffer the consequences of a dwindling tax base, or to reform the tax structure to make it more appropriately to the new global and domestic environment. Madam Speaker, this government has made the latter choice. This government will seek external assistance to advise on the implementation of VAT and at the same time to remove a host of nuisance taxes which add little revenue but are serious impediments to business in these modern times. One more line. Government aims for the introduction of the value-added tax within 12 months, that is by May 1, 2008. Unquote. Mr. Speaker, you know why I took all of this time? Whether you implemented it or not, whether you did this or not, it is very important that when I leave this honorable house, that the people of Beaufort North understand that I quoted exactly where the foundations of all of this VAT argument came from. We can tell people that we disagree with it now. We can tell people that even though the OECS agreed that it should be done, we agreed it would be 15%, and we changed our minds. Tell people that. But don't come to the house and make people believe as if you had nothing to do with it. Don't do it. Don't do it, Mr. Speaker. And I can go on and on. I will not take time now, Mr. Speaker, to speak to the what is it there? I have it in my files. The VAT, some white paper, the VAT white paper. And you should see the way they put it, the chronology that they gave in order to convince the people that VAT is the way to go. They started from 1948, and they said what happened in France, and all of that. Say you change your mind. It's not education, it's truth. Yes, but all I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, education and transparency. But yes, but do not come now to play as if you were not in it. That's the only thing I'm saying. Say you have changed your mind. That's all. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying no. I'm just saying, tell the people, yes, my hands were in it. Yes, I said 15%, but we changed our mind. And that's it. Don't come here. But Mr. Speaker, let me move on. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, let me move on quickly. Mr. Speaker, let me move on quickly. I have said before, and I will join my colleagues to say that I support the concessions for the barrels, and the Member of Parliament for Castries East and Leader of the Opposition has given the history of that. We don't need to go all into it, but I support it. But Mr. Speaker, and the people of my constituency do benefit from barrels, from their relatives, from their family. They have, like everybody else, and so I think that is a good thing for the government to continue. Just very quickly, Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries South East spoke about toys, and he said that all constituencies will be, all parliamentarians will be given toys. I want to say, and the member for Castries North asked me how many I want. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that I would have felt better respected, not as Moses Jabatis, but as a member of Parliament for Vieux Fort North. For me alone, they can say what they want. But as a member of Parliament for Vieux Fort North, it would have been a better day had they consulted us, me and my colleagues, on so many other things in the constituency. I have been begging for so many things for my people. A project to give water to Fonkapesh that was stopped, pipes under the ground and nothing, even after I spoke to the member for Babuno. So many things in Vieux Fort North that are not pronounced that I will get. But toys, because the way I look at it, it's a way of, you know, giving toys to children. The minister goes on TV and says, I gave the member of Parliament for Vieux Fort North toys for the children. Mr. Speaker, let me state in this house. The member of Parliament for Vieux Fort North personally do not want your toys. I will suggest, Mr. Speaker, to the government what to do with the toys of Vieux Fort North. But although in times past it is the former candidates who get all of those things to distribute. We have the records, the videos, and the pictures. It is the former candidates of the United Workers' Party who get toys to distribute, things from SSDF, checks and all that. So I don't want your toys. If you want to give the people of Vieux Fort North toys, there's a Bellevue Primary School. The name of the principal is Mrs. Fontinel. The principal of the Vigier Combined School, she's a new lady, very nice lady. Take the toys to her. The Grace Primary School is Mr. Kuman. Take the toys to Mr. Kuman at the Grace Primary School. The Piero Primary School is Mistress Mooney. Take the toys to her. We have 6 early childhood education centers in Vieux Fort. Take the toys to the administrators of the early childhood education center. Magadi tout chan Vieux Fort North. Mon parlement Castries South East di jodia, ikay ba mwen toys. Mwen pa vle toys li. Ma brise toys li. Tout, nous te ka mette glo en Fonkapesh. Tout ces citernes en batéa. Téfon yo pa ka mette glo ba Jean Fonkapesh. Parce que nous te commencé. L'année en chimé ka ale belle vie. Moi ça m'a pour continuer défendre. Chimé te vent avec CDP nous commencer concrete. Chic toujours yo pas mais après je voulais ba moi toys. La moi te petit moi ka faire toys avec Basse Coco, avec Caboé. Si vous voulez bailler janvier for of toys, mani pièce problème avec ça. Mais bailler Madame Fontinel en l'école Bellevue à toys là pour ces maman là. Bailler principal Vigia, belle Madame Neff, bailler ces toys là pour ces maman là. Bailler Mrs. Mooney à Pierrot toys là bailler ces maman là. Et bailler l'école Guasla toys là. Pas involvement dedans. Because Mr. Speaker, et tous ces preschool là, bailler toys là. Yo kay bien content et moi vle toys là bay c'est ma Vieux Fort North là. Pas bon moi toys. Ma vle. Every year, Mr. Speaker, the people of Vieux Fort North through the parliamentary office, we have been organizing our children's play day without help from the government. And we have a children's play day on the Grace playing field on the 22nd of December. I don't need their toys. The children need the toys. What I want them to consult me on, they are not. They are consulting the former candidate, as they've always done. No consultation on playing fields. They did something at Grace up to now. I've never received a letter. Never as parliamentary rep. Mais aujourd'hui, as of my toys. Après, the money toys. Pour jouer. Bah, c'est maman la toys là. Et bagay là, c'est mon abusé en bayoy. It's not about me. So don't come here boasting, oh, I'm going to give you toys. How much do you want? It's for the people. And the water at Fonkapesh is for the people. the roads and everything. Mr. Speaker, the member spoke about management, how they are managing well and all of that. It is very clear that this management is not real. The government's favorite tagline is this: the richest race in the Caribbean. That is the government's current tagline, the richest race in the Caribbean. Not the best hospitals in the Caribbean. Not the best schools in the Caribbean. Not the best classrooms in the Caribbean. But the richest race in the Caribbean. All those who can get your large hats and your tuxedos, the richest race in the Caribbean. That's the tagline. That's the kind of management, Mr. Speaker. That's the kind of management. And you want me to tell the people of Beaufort North, the people of Grace, who don't even know whether they will have a road, because after you mashing up meat processing plants, you may well change the course of the road. He said best management, Mr. Speaker. Best management. While our schools and our hospitals are rotting, but they have the best management. They did not renew contracts of nice workers. But Mr. Speaker, when you go to many of these agencies, while there is no formal NICE program, there is an underhand, secretive kind of placement program similar to the NICE program. Go to St. Jude's, go to many of these places. They quietly go in the communities and select people and do the same thing that the NICE program was doing. And so, what have they done? Even in the STEP program, they said there were no toilets. Lapani toilet. Mr. Speaker, you got gumek parliamentary representatives who step là. You got gumek nous. Who step là, qui ont dit, la paneli pou évite by ces moun nan, by ces madame là. Mais only come a step tout partout. Nothing creative from this government. And you're talking about management? You're talking about management? You're talking about management? And all of these taxes, Mr. Speaker, the VAT, which the member for Castle South said they're going to remove this and remove that. Water, VAT on electricity, VAT on funerals. But the same people who will bury their loved ones through the gas tax, the fishers who will bury their loved ones, you are taking $13,000 in taxes, in fuel tax from Sepeshia, $12 million, calculately. The people with FAR funds, you're taking $7,000 to $8,000 in fuel taxes. So when you're trying to say you're taking out from it, you're taking it 10 times next side. You're taking from people with diesel trucks, fuel taxes, $12,000 and $14,000. That's wickedness, Mr. Speaker. And they're talking about reduction. So, Mr. Speaker, as I close, I support the reduction of the removal of the duties on barrels. The Labour Party started it, and we'll never stop saying the reason the Labour Party started it is because we were a compassionate government. We are a compassionate government. We did that. We gave $500 to parents to help them in the after common entrance and so many other things. We're a compassionate government. So don't jump up now as if, oh, it's a good thing, so we're doing it. The good things that we started in our constituencies, you never continued it because of partisan politics. I don't want to respond because the very thing you're saying goes against all grain of goodness and what we should do as good people. So because you think it was done to you, do it. And the tagline, Mr. Speaker, is the richest race in the Caribbean. So that is all this government is about, the richest. The richest, tall horses. They buy the horses, then they now turn solutions, buy back the same horses that our money have to pay for. You ever heard that? Our money have to pay for the thing, but they're telling solutions to buy the thing that our own money paid for. The richest. That's all you're about, the richest race in the Caribbean. So, Mr. Speaker, while I support it, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that my people in Beaufort North will contribute, will benefit, and I want to reiterate for the last time that I, Moses Jean-Baptiste, personally, I do not want the government's toys, personally. And I want to remind the government, I'm saying it publicly, to give the toys to the schools and give the toys to the childhood education centers. We'll have our own children's play day. We have all our things organized, but the toys that the government is giving, give it to the schools and the 6 early childhood education centers in Beaufort North. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member Mikudno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I did not imagine that toys would be the substantive discussion here today, because when I read the order paper, I noted that for discussion were 2 matters which to my mind would help in our continuing efforts to bring relief to the people of St. Lucia and to provide economic opportunity. And in this particular case, Mr. Speaker, I am obliged to support the motion before us because there's yet another indication that we on this side continue to do more, especially for our local entrepreneurs, and that is why I'm obligated to support this. On the other matter regarding the barrels and the concessions, much has been said about the genesis of this, so I'll say no more on that matter, except to highlight that whereas we continue to support the barrel concessions, especially preceding the Christmas season, that we must never underestimate the value of that initiative. Because it is through that mechanism that many St. Lucians who live abroad continue to support their families, and especially at a time like Christmas, that support is very much welcome. But while I'm on my feet on that matter, Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me if I were not to contextualize why more needs to be done, not only with respect to the barrel, but with respect to deeper and more wide-ranging engagement with the St. Lucian diaspora. Too very often, we stand to benefit from the continuing efforts of the diaspora to help build this nation to which they belong. And this initiative, the Barrel Initiative, is but one of the mechanisms through which the diaspora can continue to contribute to the social and economic development of St. Lucians. In that regard, therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that people from my constituency in particular, people who have been very hard hit by the changing paradigms in agriculture, the shifts from one cash crop to a next, from bananas to some other cash crop, that really this brings relief beyond measure. I don't think that people recognize what the erosion of the Lome arrangements and the demise of the banana industry would have done to rural communities in particular. I don't think the average bystander understands not only the economic impact, but the psychological toll that this thing took on banana-producing communities in particular. And in fact, I am sure if we were to take the time to do the research, you would see that there is a corresponding migratory trend post the demise of the banana industry to capitals in metropolitan capitals. And that is why this facility is one that we continue to support, because it presents a readily available avenue for the continuing economic participation for those who would have migrated. And I know that there are other mechanisms that we are looking at to ensure
that the St. Lucian diaspora can contribute more meaningfully to the development of our country. Mr. Speaker, again, while I'm on my feet, you know, there are some things that one can let slide, but others one must respond to. I don't know how much real value there is in tracing the very root of the VAT implementation in St. Lucia. I don't know how much value there is in that. Because all of us seated in here understand all too well what were the economic necessities or drivers for consideration for such a tax regime. Let us not pretend. Let us not pretend. However, for those of us with selective amnesia, while we want to quote documents that may support the posture that we want to adopt today rather conveniently, let us not forget one statement that I myself will not forget. And that is the statement that was made by the former Prime Minister and Minister for Finance at the time, in the period 2010-2011, that notwithstanding the administrative plans that were being made to implement VAT, he said on more than one occasion, he can speak for himself, but I recall vividly that his hesitation was informed by a singular posture, and that is whether the economy can absorb the 17% implementation of VAT. You mean I'm the only person in here who recalls that the concern was the implementation of VAT and at what percentage, and whether the solution economy could absorb it. That was the moral compass that he used. Whether it would take disposable income out of the pockets of St. Lucians and whether it would result in the economic strangulation of this country. He's right here, he can speak for himself. And that is why we pondered on whether it needed to be implemented and how and at what percentage. So when we sat on the other side there, for those who care to remember, our position was that VAT implementation at 15% was way too onerous, that the economy could not absorb the implementation of VAT at that level. Notwithstanding that we understood in part some of the economic pressures from international agencies perhaps for considering that. So when we come here and remaining true to our original posture, that is the concern about the people of St. Lucia and what it means for disposable income, what we have shown is that incrementally we are doing what is best for the people of this country. And we did it very early on when we eroded the first 2.5%. And then we also are in line to, again, something we said in opposition, that are you going to put VAT on the dead? Are you going to burden families already in grief and mourning with the additional responsibility of finding VAT to pay on coffins and caskets? We will continue to show that we are a government of empathy and compassion, and albeit incrementally, we will do what is best for the people of this country. And for those over there who are prompting me to talk about schools, they should not do that. Because I want to ask them, and we'll come to that one day, Mr. Speaker, why is it that the very report that they commissioned that showed that this country needed upward of $40 million to rehabilitate schools, they did not make it a priority and only allocated $1 million. Don't ask me what you don't want to hear. Don't ask me what you don't want to hear. Well, for those of you asking me about schools,
Honorable, Honorable members. Honorable members. Oh, honorable members, the good minister and member for Miko North will provide all the answers in due time. Continue.
Mr. Speaker, albeit that they're not filing their questions with decorum, I'm still answering for the benefit of the people of St. Lucia. That this government has made education a priority in the same way we have made local entrepreneurs a priority, which is why we've come with the motion before us today. That we have allocated $20 million that they could never find. They found $60 million plus to erect a building. They could not find $10 million to put in education. So let us talk about who cares about people in this house. So, Mr. Speaker, on the note of compassion, on the note of empathy, on the evidence that we care about local entrepreneurs as per the motion in here, on the evidence that we care about the people of St. Lucia as what is contained in here, more will be said at the appropriate time, but let us not be convenient with what we choose to recall. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member Castries North.
Yeah, it's 3 years the entry for school got like that. Ask him where he lives.
Yes, mold first came to St. Lucia on the 6th of June 2016. There was no mold in St. Lucia
Mr.
while you
Speaker,
were
I
there.
beg for your protection.
Honorable members.
Mr. Speaker,
You live it by this school.
I came to today's Parliament with the intention of not necessarily participating in the debate, because for me, the sole motion on the agenda relates in part to a matter which for years have come to this Parliament, and if we were to look at Hansard, I am sure you will recognize that on every occasion it came to this Parliament, while I, as a former Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, was in opposition, it received the support of myself and the opposition members. And what is the motion, Mr. Speaker? If I am asked to bring this Parliament back on course, because it would appear, when I listen to the member for VF4 North, it would appear that we have now come to the Parliament in the spirit of Creole with a journée Creole debate. Temps passé, avant. And so, I do not believe that's what the debate is about, but I'll deal with some things in a while. Mr. Speaker, what we are called upon to do here today is an affirmative resolution to deal with Schedule 1. It is Schedule 1 under Item 1 to include a definition for the words of educational supplies. And the reason why we came here, and not just come for barrels, because barrels have been coming and coming and coming for a long time now. So it's not about barrels. It's about a consciousness that in addition to what comes in the barrels are educational supplies, which needs a conscious government, a government who cares for the people, who must do something about those educational supplies. And so, with the support of the opposition, we are saying we need to clarify or to elucidate the definition for educational supplies so that there are no gray areas to allow competitors, the manufacturing sector and others, to be able to have a fair share in the supplies, the educational supplies, whether it's in printing or otherwise. The other one which states, under Item 2.2, to include the supply of the service of printing and educational supplies as a zero-raised supply of service. So in other words, because we recognize that if you were to bring a printed document or printed material, whether it's a book or otherwise, it is zero, it is not vatable. But if you're to print that same book in St. Lucia, then it attracts VAT. We are saying that we need to zero this so that at least to give the necessary competition. And then it goes on. In the case of Schedule 3, to exempt imports and personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household commodities contained in barrels. But, Mr. Speaker, it would appear that some of us cannot contain ourselves. Some of us cannot contain ourselves because we must go in the past and uncover, I said some of us. Who did I refer to? I said some of us. It includes you and it includes those of us here. It includes both sides. It includes both sides. So I'm saying some of us cannot contain ourselves. And I'm one person, Mr. Speaker, in politics. I do not waver on my positions. All of what the member for Vieux-Fort North mentioned in the budget speech, it belongs to me. I said it with conviction, I said it with a sense of belief and a sense of responsibility to the St. Lucian people. But you see, one of the things, Mr. Speaker, I must say today, is that St. Lucia has had a track record of regional commitment, a track record to integration, a track record to unification, a track record to OECS unity, a track record to CARICOM, a track record to implementation of decisions of CARICOM on the OECS. And notwithstanding changes in administration, our track record at the regional and international standard stands unchallenged. So when Sir John returned in 2006 and he made his statements, which the honorable member for Vieux-Fort North referred to, it was out of that commitment, that standard of honorable men who believed in supporting regional initiatives and understanding that decisions taken by previous administrations, unless there's a colossal mistake, that we must stand with it and proceed. And Sir John was very clear. He made the statement, Mr. Speaker. He gave the reasons why. There was a tax commission which was done by the ECCU. Looking at the whole situation of the Eastern Caribbean Union and the question of taxation. How do we fix taxation? How do we fix the advent of World Trade Organization and the situation in the banana industry and the sugarcane industry? How do we deal with situations in services? How can we augment and improve on our revenues and to bring about stable economies? And the discussion, as I said in my budget address, Mr. Speaker, dates way back to 2003. 2003, I'm not blaming the former administration. The former administration found themselves in a situation where they were compelled to participate in a regional discussion that affected not only St. Lucia, but every single member of the Economic Union. That is what it is, Mr. Speaker. And so, when we came in, we continued the conversation. We continued the discussion. We recognized the stresses under which our government at the time haven't taken over, the stresses that we were under, Mr. Speaker. And we decided that we must continue that conversation to discuss the issue of the VAT introduction in St. Lucia. So, Mr. Speaker, until such time when we will come to this Parliament for the total abolition of VAT and the introduction of a sales tax or any other measure, I believe some of these details will be visited again, revisited again, so that there's greater understanding of the wisdom in what we are saying, in the wisdom in what we said then, and to pave the way for the way forward. Mr. Speaker, I am not into this debate about 15%, 17%, 12.5%. What the debate I'm involved in, Mr. Speaker, is a commitment and a conviction to the people of this country. So that every time we recognize there's a need for a reduction, as we did with the 2.5% reduction, we took the decision to reduce and to give some relief to the people of this country. Every time we see that there's a need to waive the VAT, as we do every year on the Christmas barrels, etc., we see merit in it, whether it was introduced by the former administration or not, we have supported it throughout. And we continue to support it for the last 4 years in supporting that measure every year at December time. And on this occasion, where we recognize that there's a need to bring clarity to what is considered educational supplies, we have taken a decision to come to the Parliament and to table it so as we can deal with the situation. But more than this, Mr. Speaker, you heard earlier on that members speaking about the need to waive VAT on burial fees. How can you tax the dead? How can you tax the dead? So, Mr. Speaker, you know, we need to do it. We will come to do it and bring that relief to people. That even at death, we need to get rid of that tax so that people can bury the dead without taxing the dead who cannot speak anymore and who cannot breathe anymore. So, Mr. Speaker, I will end here. I will end here, Mr. Speaker, because I believe that this resolution, this motion which is being presented, is a motion of good intentions. And I know each and every one of the 4 members represented here today are committed to the resolution. Each one. I know each and every member, Mr. Speaker, recognize the significance and the importance of the resolution, of the motion. And so, Mr. Speaker, I believe the discussion as to VAT, where it originated, who brought it in, who spoke of 15%, etc., I also know that they understand the necessity, the need, and of course the relevance of the introduction of VAT based on the economies of the OECS states, the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union at the time, and the visioning of where we're going with a global environment that is constantly changing and the challenges of international trade and international economies of the world. And so, Mr. Speaker, I stand to support this motion, understanding that it is a necessity and it is one which will benefit not just the country on a whole, but particularly our poor people in this country. And I would hope, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding all the bravado about toys, we all know that the children look for toys. We all know that. But if you do not want the toy, how can you say who to give the toy to? Because you have not owned it. You must first own it and say, thank you very much, but give it to Tom, Dick, and Harry. That's how you give an instruction, Mr. Speaker. You cannot give what is not yours. I'm not arrogant. I'm not arrogant. I said if you have not owned it, you must first accept it. You must first accept it to give it away. First accept it. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Prime Minister.
A what?
Mr. Speaker, for a simple bill or a simple motion, there are so many things to be able to respond to. But we have to start, Mr. Speaker, with a genesis, a common theme. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, particularly in the last year, a common theme that I have seen resonating from members on the opposite side is their inability to escape the past. That I hear comments from members on the other side, Mr. Speaker, in which you would think that they were never in government. That you would have thought that some of the things that they're addressing, that they never had the opportunity to have delivered on those same issues. You would have thought that they were never in government before, Mr. Speaker. Never. You look at the last 2 campaigns, Mr. Speaker, One promised better days and all what that meant. And by all accounts, by the result of the election, they had failed to deliver the better days. Mr. Speaker, there was also a promise of jobs, jobs, jobs. And that also was not delivered. As I know that's what they can say, it's in the past, but you see, but you cannot escape the past, Mr. Speaker. That is the point I'm making. You cannot escape the past. The past is very important in giving you an understanding of where we're going to be going into the future. So, Mr. Speaker, members on the opposite side may believe that they're fooling some people, but they're not fooling them. This attitude that I continuously see by members on the other side, that there's some level of compassion for the people of this country, is just fictitious. In fact, we don't have to guess whether in fact that is correct or not, Mr. Speaker. We know it. We know it by their actions. To come here or any other place and suggest that you cared about education? Really? When I went to the Soufriere Comprehensive School, and I picked Soufriere, you know, Mr. Speaker, because Soufriere is a constituency that for 4 terms, without a doubt, elected. Yes, I lost in Soufriere. I lost. You happy? Okay, I can live with my past. Okay, but I can learn from my past because that's why I'm Prime Minister today. Okay? And when I sat there and you told me I would never be a member of this house, I would never be a leader, and I see the man who said that over his dead body, that once again he has died on his statements of what cannot happen to him. But Mr. Speaker, education, comprehensive school in Soufriere. There was no doors on the school classrooms. The bathrooms were not working. The roofs were leaking. Mondador, 1982, the school was built. That they had become experts on moving buckets to capture the water that was falling from the roofs. That the railings were falling apart. You go through all the schools of St. Lucia, and then when you look back at history and you ask yourself, here is a government that continued to say they cared about the people, they cared about the youth of this country. Where was that reflected, Mr. Speaker? $1 million a year? So the principal lied. The principal said to me that she got $4,000 EC a year for maintenance, Mr. Speaker. 4,000 EC dollars. When you could now take 130 schools and divide it by the million, see what number you get. We talk about a party that has suggested to people and has tried to convince people that they cared about the health of this country, and want to come and talk about a health care situation that is in crisis today. Really, Mr. Speaker? Did they not know? Did they never went to go and see what the state of the primary health care services were in this country? And they have been fixed. And they continue to be improved. 14 of them have been made into smart primary health care services. And there's $20 million that is now coming to equip all of them. Do you know why, Mr. Speaker? Because the same thing is that when they talked about being able to open up OKEU, Mr. Speaker, the reason why they could not open up OKEU, and we have all the examples of naming the hospital and talking about cafeterias and laundry rooms and all this, is they did not have the money to do it. They could not figure out how to finance the operation. So out of frustration and through pressure of when we were in opposition, what did they do? They allocated $10 million to the Ministry of Health and said, move in, make it work. $10 million. How was that going to work? Ask them. A University of West Indies study says that it's going to cost $70 million a year to operate OKEU. Where were they going to get the money from? But here's most importantly, because you have to look at the things to make a determination as to whether there was any sincerity, if there was any good conscience on members of the opposite side to resolve the healthcare problems in this country. And the fact is that you were going into a smaller hospital of 125 rooms. Your own studies suggest that you had to be able to beef up the primary health care services, so you had not done that. You had trained nobody, that you were going to have to double the budget allocation from $35 million to $70 million. You had made no allocation to be able to do that either. There is no improvement in Victoria Hospital. The same as St. Jude, which was in the stadium that you inherited. I challenge you to tell me what were the physical things you did to improve the 5 years while people were in a stadium. What did you do? Did you get new equipment? Did you bring new beds? Did you add more dialysis machines? What did you do? Did you create any more new facilities for the people to make them comfortable? The fact is, nothing was done, Mr. Speaker. It was ignored. In fact, what they were doing was not busily building St. Jude's, but as I've said, they were busily spending money. How many times was the roof replaced? Do we all not know that there was a graveyard of all the concrete walls that had been built and had been broken down and buried? And then rebuilt again, broken down again, and buried. Tons of concrete that have been buried underground. We call it the graveyard. And after 5 years, they were so compassionate. They were so caring. There was such a great sense of urgency. And despite the fact that, let's look at it, that in Soufriere, the representative was from which party? Labour. The representative from Choiseul was from which party? Labour. The member from the party from Labrie, from Labour. From Vieux-Fort South, from Vieux-Fort North, all Labour. And one of the Denrys, Labour. When they talk about members on this side remaining silent, the silence was deafening for 5 years, Mr. Speaker. At no point do I ever recall, whether in the House or out of the House, any member from the South complaining as to how long it was taking to build St. Jude. At not one point. And in fact, when the elections came, they were no closer to opening the hospital than when they started 5 years before that. They made no improvements in any of the healthcare services, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we then talk about security. This is a government that keeps on telling me about how crime is on the rise. Yet when we came into government, simple things, CCTV cameras that they had promised had never been purchased and implemented. The policemen were using their own phones, Mr. Speaker. The same structural organization and how we're going to promote policemen. That is why the policemen voted against them, you know. Because the policemen knew that all they were was a party of bluffers. That's all, bluffers. So what did they do? They gave nothing to the policemen. They did not even fix up the police stations. The same police stations that they built years ago had fallen in deplorable conditions. No hot water, no furniture. Okay? But guess what? That's a party and that's a government that cared about the people of St. Lucia. Then we talk about the economy. 5 years you came in, you couldn't even grow the economy. Unemployment was constantly on the increase. There was no progress, there was no hope, there was no inspiration. Forget about talking about young people wanting to get into entrepreneurial skills. People were just looking to survive. That is the legacy of your past. And you cannot escape it. And you have no moral authority at this point, given a government that is performing and delivering to the people of St. Lucia, to suggest otherwise. Because all they have, Mr. Speaker, is fluff and bluff. That's it. There's nothing else. At the end of the day, let's talk about infrastructure. How is it you were going to resolve the problem of the roads and the dam and electricity and sewage in this country when you were only putting $1 million a year in to maintain the roads? How is that going to happen? And you know what? You had a member who was the Minister of Infrastructure, who is, according to him, because I still haven't found that position, right? The Deputy Prime Minister of St. Lucia for the 20 years. And I want it to be known, for 20 years he has been the Deputy Prime Minister of this country.
Mr. Speaker, on
in
a
the
point
absence
of
the
order,
time
you
that he was
lied.
in government.
Mr.
Honorable,
Speaker, on a point of order.
honorable,
You misleading the House.
honorable members, honorable members. Honorable Leader of the Opposition, you spoke into the mic and you said you lied. I would like you to withdraw this one. Thank you very much. Now, the point of order, yes.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is misleading the House. I was not Deputy Prime Minister for 20 years. I was Deputy Prime Minister from the year 2011, 2016, and I'm proud of it. And he must withdraw his misstatement.
Honorable Prime Minister, he was not leader of the Deputy Prime Minister for 20 years.
Mr. Speaker, I would hope that after my lesson that he would use more decorum in being able to say that. I'm very happy to make the correction. That for the time that his party was in government, he's always been the self-imposed deputy political leader. Because I thought that what he would have talked about is to justify the term
Mr. Speaker,
deputy.
he's even going worse, Mr. Speaker. He's worse. He's worse. And he's worse.
This man just poppy shit.
Because he just believes, you see, Mr. Speaker, he believes he's still in the days of slavery. That's his problem.
Mr. Speaker,
Honorable members, we've started, although it was a long debate, but the debate went well. Let's not end it on a bad footing.
So, Mr. Speaker, what have we learned? We've learned that the members on the other side, by evidence of their own actions and evidence of the history, which is easily accessible to us, cannot in any way say that they care about the poor people of this country, that they have a conscience about the poor people of this country. You take even something as simple that they want to be able to take out of total context. When we pointed out that OKEU was sufficiently finished that we ought to be able to send the dialysis lab that was in a condemned building at Victoria, that we felt that they should go ahead and move it in. Made all kinds of excuses. At no point did they come to the defense of the people and say, you know what, even though that idea came from somebody else, it's a good idea, and let us now move towards actually implementing that. Because anybody who would have gone to the building where the dialysis lab was at Victoria, which is the old nurses' home, that building has been earmarked to be condemned. And they said it couldn't happen. In fact, they said it was impossible. And they said that the lab itself was not finished, but we now know the lab was finished. All that was missing was the chairs. And guess where, Mr. Speaker, the chairs were? 8 of the chairs were in a container in Vieux Fort, and had been in a container in Vieux Fort for years. Like a lot of other equipment that had been purchased for St. Jude's, in a container, or in people's homes, or in people's warehouses, or abroad, but not where it was supposed to be. But they didn't know. So what have we done? We've moved the dialysis lab for over a year, in fact more than a year, into the OKU. We have doubled up, sorry, let me not say doubled up. We've increased by the amount of 5, because it was 7 before. We've gone to 12 now, dialysis facilities at St. Jude's. There's now a proper X-ray machine at St. Jude's. There are now mobile MRI units at St. Jude's. There are new beds as we speak going into St. Jude's. The roof that was causing problems was taken down and cleaned up, and the concrete roof was reinforced. We have gone through the length and breadth of our system in terms of improving the quality of healthcare in terms of the facilities. But, Mr. Speaker, that is not what is going to solve the healthcare crisis in our country. Because the biggest problem with healthcare in our country
is the affordability. How many St. Lucians are not in a position right now to be able to go to a doctor? How many people that even if they go to the hospital and they were to be given a prescription, they don't know where they're going to get the prescription? So the singular most important thing to be able to deliver on is healthcare insurance. And to make it so that we have a national healthcare insurance program in which the vulnerable, the unemployed, and the elderly will be able to have. And my government made a commitment, and we're going to deliver on that commitment. In fact, we've been working with the World Bank and the IMF in order to be able to prepare how that process is going to work. Because it's not an easy process. And there's certain commitments that we have to make on a government side to be able to afford it. But guess what? We know that we have to do it. So, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to security, my government has shown through its actions that not only have we recognized that security is a critical issue, but that we're on the way to resolving the problems that we have. I mean, you have a government that presided over a situation, Mr. Speaker, 1,000-case backlog of criminal cases. I want to hear, I never heard the members on the other side even identify that problem, far less tell us a solution as to how they were going to solve it. Okay? And that is right. Y'all couldn't, but we will. You couldn't, but we will. Okay? So, Mr. Speaker, let me bring up now, as it relates to this bill. I thought I would have sat here today quietly, and I would have heard from members on the opposite side, particularly on the adjustment with regards to the VAT for the manufacturing sector. That I would have heard from members on the opposite side, you know what? We really wanted to have done that. We never got around to doing it, but it was a good thing to do. But you see, members on the opposite side are so smart and so clever because they could never come and lower themselves to admit a mistake. So instead, what does the leader of the opposition say? I support the bill, particularly the barrels. He never said specifically the other part. Okay? Implied. You hear that, Mr. Speaker? Implied. It was implied. Okay? So it goes without saying. But instead, what you should have done is to say, for the 5 years, we knew that this was a problem. For 5 years. And I'm really hoping, Mr. Speaker, that members on the opposite side will not challenge me on the 5 years. Because I have my proof. For 5 years that they knew that this was a problem. And that this was causing an egregious situation for our local manufacturers. And instead of resolving it, they allowed it to fester. They allowed it to stay there. And they never made the amendment. That was what I was really hoping to have heard from them today. So, Mr. Speaker, we also have a situation where we're going to talk about that. I'm not going to be as gracious as the member from Beaufort, so I'm from Castries North. I have not learned to be as diplomatic as he can be. And that is an art that he has, and that's one I truly admire. But the fact is that, and can I make it circulated, Mr. Speaker? I take it from this because it basically, we also have the budget speech of the Leader of the Opposition for 2007, but I will not be overly tedious and do what the member from Beaufort North did. Until I'll extract the most important part, which is so well done in the Jamaica Gleaner of April 25th, 2007, where it says that Dr. Kenny Anthony, former Prime Minister of St. Lucia, is against plans to introduce a value-added tax, saying it was oppressive and undesirable for workers and the poor. Anthony's successor, Prime Minister Sir John Compton, last Thursday announced that the consumption tax would be introduced within a year, saying it was necessary as much-needed revenue earner for St. Lucia as he presented his administration's $1.2 billion budget. Sir John said while the other organization of Eastern Caribbean states, countries, had either implemented or were about to introduce VAT system, on the advice of the Eastern Caribbean Monetary Council, the former administration did not have the political will
to do so ahead of the December 2006 general election. But Anthony, in his contribution to the budget debate, said he did not consider the tax necessary. We were never persuaded that VAT was the wisest choice because we believed that it was potentially an oppressive tax. It is oppressive to the poor, it is oppressive to the workers, said Anthony. The fact is that the cost of living in St. Lucia is one of the lowest, if not the lowest in the OECS, and that's why they come and shop here. Anthony said that in every country where VAT has been introduced, it was accompanied by an increase in food prices. When the Minister of Finance tells us that he is going to introduce VAT, that is a revenue neutral, don't be disingenuous. All of us know the sole reason why you have to introduce VAT is not only to spread the burden of, most importantly, to raise additional revenue. You see how words come back to haunt you? So the point is that on getting into office, because for the 5 years that we were in office, we never introduced the VAT. In fact, that there was very serious debate about the introduction of the VAT. And there are many people who would have also agreed in many ways with what the former Prime Minister had said. But the fact is, Mr. Speaker, the facts speak for itself. It was never introduced. Now here's what happens. But you see, this is how life comes back to bite you. The important thing here was that the management of the economy during those 5 years was in fact so good that we were able to convince the World Bank and the IMF to hold off. And in fact, let us recall what happened in those 5 years. We had Hurricane Thomas in 2010. We had a drought. We had a shock of commodity prices. We had the worst financial crisis in the world since the 1930s. And the oil prices went up. And in that 5-year period, if you go to the Social and Economic Review of 2018, on page 113 and 112, you'll see the evidence of the numbers that we have to speak about. So the overall deficit, Mr. Speaker, while Stephenson King was Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of this country, came to a total of $352 million for the 5 years. Now what's interesting is that the last year, which was the year after Thomas, it went up by 166 million. So half of the increase of the deficit was in 1 year. And that was the year following Hurricane Thomas. So it means that we weathered all those storms and allowed the country to remain in a fiscal position where the urgency of introducing VAT was not there. Now what happened? The new government came in. Did the new government implement VAT right away? No. They did not introduce VAT right away. They didn't introduce it in the second year. They introduced it in the third year. And why? I'm going to go back to the Gleaner article. It says, when the Minister of Finance tells us that he's going to introduce VAT that is revenue neutral, do not be disingenuous. All of us know the sole reason why you have introduced VAT is not only to spread the burden, but most importantly, to raise additional revenue. So what happened? In the 5 years that they were in government, the first year, the overall deficit was $227 million. The second year, it was negative $328 million. The third year, minus $216 million. In fact, in the 5 years, it was just over $950 billion of additional million deficit. And so the fact is, what people don't understand is that when you have those deficits, how do you fund those deficits? It's through borrowing. And equally now, what you can do is to see that the money that the country was borrowing was in fact not to make capital investments into the country, but to finance this deficit. And it was because of this financial crunch that they were left with absolutely no choice. A government, particularly the Minister of Finance, who had publicly said that it was an oppressive tax and it was the worst thing to be able to introduce into the country, he was left with no choice but to introduce it. And the fact is that exactly what he said was going to happen is what happened. So when my government was in opposition and we reviewed the VAT situation, there were some things, Mr. Speaker, that we realized immediately. We realized that the 15% was too high, and that in fact it was covering areas that it ought not to, one of them being rent. So a lot of small businesses, Mr. Speaker, they keep on talking about how they care about the small person, right? So a person who was a barber, a person who had a small shop with 2 people employed, all of a sudden his rent went up by 15%. And despite the clamors of the private sector, alerting them to this issue, they paid no heed. And how do we know that it was detrimental to the country? Because the following year, corporate tax revenue, which was at $95 million, Mr. Speaker, dropped to $55 million. That was the immediate impact of that. Now, why is it that our members on this side believe that eventually we have to go to a sales tax? It's because a value-added tax in its name says what it is. Generally, it's about a manufacturer importing unassembled products and making it into a product. And that when he then sells it to the wholesaler, he is paying the value added on that portion. It then, from the wholesaler who then packages it and sends it over to the retailer, he adds on his small value added. And then eventually the retailer only pays that VAT when he gets it from the warehouse, and therefore he has timed it to make sure it does not stay on his shelves long, and he then pays, and the consumer pays the final VAT. But the problem is, Mr. Speaker, we don't have an economy in which we have a lot of products that are coming into our system that are in that mode. So in fact, the vast majority of products that we're importing are finished products. So it means that we're paying the VAT, the total VAT, literally at the point of entry. And the retailer, who is the person importing it, is carrying the cost of that inventory all the way through the system until it's eventually sold. So how do we now go about addressing the situation, Mr. Speaker? We very cleverly said we believe that we can afford to reduce the VAT rate, and that VAT rate is either going to improve the margins of the businesses or it's going to be passed on to the benefit of the consumer, one or the other. But both of them will benefit the country, either one. We had to go to the World Bank and the IMF to convince them of that. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, it was not easy. I remember the first Article 4 meeting here. 4 to 5 hours we stayed in my office, dialoguing to be able to convince the World Bank and the IMF that we were going in the right direction. It was solely on the evidence, the fact that 10 of the most indebted middle-income countries in the world come from CARICOM. And we said to the World Bank and the IMF, you cannot show me a policy strategy that has been effective in this region. And it's on the basis of that the World Bank and the IMF did not necessarily concede, but said we will give you 1 year to show it. So what did they say? Like what the members have repeated on the other side, that in fact that if we decrease the VAT by 2.5%, and I want you to say, we keep on saying by 2.5%, which is to marginalize in fact what it is. It is a 16% reduction in the VAT rate. That's what it is, a 16% reduction in the VAT rate. And we said now that we would collect $55 million less in revenue. We also talked about putting on the airport tax. And the airport tax, they said was going to reduce our competitiveness in the tourism market. And they also said that the gas tax was going to create inflation in our country. And in fact, members on the opposite side ran with that story, and that's where their position was. But a year later, what did we find out? We found out that the drop in revenue was only $15 million the first year. And by the second year, Mr. Speaker, we actually had recovered all the money. So what does that mean? If in fact the rate was less and we're collecting as much money, it tells you that the economy is turning over, that there's sales and there's activity in the marketplace. And immediately we saw our corporate tax rate go up to $90 million. With regards to the airport tax, we indicated that most tourists do not know how much they're spending on an airline ticket, because what they buy, Mr. Speaker, is they buy a package. So when a person is buying a package for 7 nights that includes the airfare and the rooms and their tours, the $75 increase comes to $7.50 per person more. That's 2 cups of coffee. And what was the result? Is that our tourism arrivals the following year increased by 11%. In fact, we had a record number of arrivals in the same year. And then furthermore, there was a situation in which they said that we'd have inflation. But what happened was the reduction in the VAT offset the increase in the gas tax. And we had no increase in our inflation. So we know that we were right. The country, and in particular, Mr. Speaker, the small business people, of which the Labour Party only knows how to say when it comes to electoring. When it comes to running elections, they know who the Malawi is, and they know who the poor people are. But when they're in government, these people become invisible to them. Repeatedly, they have made that mistake. Repeatedly. And that's what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. What they're not accustomed to is having a party that's in government that's actually delivering on its manifesto. The 5 to stay alive. Within 6 months, everything was delivered. And why? We wanted to give immediate relief to the people who were invisible to the Labour Party. All the people who the school feeding program had been cut, we doubled it. The school transportation program that had been cut, we doubled it. The elderly people who did not and don't have ability of increasing their pensions were struggling to pay their property taxes. We gave them a 3-year amnesty. All the elderly and the vulnerable people in this country who have good conscience, good people, who went to the doctor or went to the hospital and there was a bill, could not bring themselves to go back simply because they owed money. And we gave them an amnesty. And what that was to immediately inject wealth and to give relief to those people. The 5 to stay alive was never meant to be the economic bonanza to solve all the problems. That came out when you look at our manifesto in terms of what we intend to do, Mr. Speaker, in education. Not about just educating kids, but giving them a globally competitive education system. Introducing now e-booklets, and e-booklets that actually have working programs, not computers that have nothing, no relationship to the teacher, no relationship to the student. Where are they now? We're going to have e-books, and those e-books actually have software. Whether in fact they actually did their homework, and that people could now turn around. So all I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, we continuously have a debate with members on the opposite side, where they make all kinds of allegations, but they themselves could not deliver, could never deliver. And the fact is that anybody who wants to be able to believe them, Mr. Speaker, to be disillusioned by the Labour Party on its promises of taking care of people, it couldn't do it for 15 years. It couldn't deliver. Because when they left office, healthcare was truly in crisis. Education was in crisis. Security was in crisis. The infrastructure of this country was in crisis. Now, one of the critical things, Mr. Speaker, because I want to address the issue now with regards to when do we continue the journey of reducing the VAT. We know that in order to be able to do that, we have to be able to have an e-government system. We have to be able to create a system, Mr. Speaker, in which we can simplify the personal income tax, simplify the corporate tax, and yes, we wanted to be able to do that this year, but because of the blacklisting with the Europeans, all hands had to be on deck to resolve that. But we've now hopefully putting that behind us, and we're now going to be focusing, Mr. Speaker, on being able to resolve the issue with personal income taxes and also with corporate taxes, and introducing an e-government system. The other thing why the e-government system is so important, Mr. Speaker, and how it relates back to the reduction and the elimination of the VAT rate, is very simply this, Mr. Speaker. We cannot eliminate the VAT rate until we're able to put a direct social system to support people. So the idea is that once people have an ID card, a smart ID card, and we know that they are of a particular economic category, they're not going to have to apply for school books. If in fact you qualify for school books, they'll be given to you. If in fact you qualify for bus transportation, you'll give it to you. So for instance, here's the problem. We have a system for many years in where we subsidize rice, flour, and sugar. We have a basket of goods in which we have zero rated. And what is it? To fool ourselves that we're helping poor people? So in order to be able to give people who deserve lower rice prices and lower flour prices and lower sugar prices, we have to discount it for everybody. Martinicans are coming here. Hoteliers are benefiting from it. So what we want to be able to do is to put a system in which our inducements are targeted, and that we have a tax regime that those who can afford to pay the taxes do, and that government now will be using those reservoirs in order to be able to make sure that we take care of the more vulnerable people in our society. And never shall they be going invisible or unheard of. We listen to them every day. We are incredibly reactive to what's going on. That is why last year we spent $5.5 million as a government in supporting families in need for health care. That is why getting the St. Jude's up and running and opening, that we've improved the quality of the facility at the stadium. That is why we're now improving and have improved the facilities in the primary health care services. And that is why we're going to have a massive training program, but more importantly, that we're going to introduce a health care insurance, a card in which people now, when they are sick, they can go to the doctor. And the benefit to the state is that we will, for the first time, have a state of health of our country. We will know who has high blood pressure, who's pre-diabetic, and start capturing and addressing those problems before they become crisis. But more importantly, that we'll now have programs to be able to benefit those people, and we have the empirical evidence, Mr. Speaker, to show whether in fact that we're making a dent in our problems. So, Mr. Speaker, the initiative today was to address an egregious act that was imposed on our manufacturing sector, and despite the fact that members on the opposite side knew that, they did nothing to do it, to solve it. But I'm not surprised. We also came here to continue to support the barrel, because that is something that helps the more vulnerable in our society. And we will do everything, and we lay claim to no ideas. All we do is exactly what the Honorable Stephenson King said, is mindful that it's impacting the most amount of people, and especially the people that need it the most. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable Prime Minister, quick question. Your statement, you will circulate it? Or are you going to give it to the Parliament to circulate? Thank you very much. Honorable members, the question is that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedules 1 and 3, order, which amends Schedule 1 and 3 of the Act. A. In case of Schedule 1, under Item 1, to include the definition for the words educational supplies. 2. Under Schedule 2.2, to include, under Item 2.2, to include the supply of printing of educational supplies as a zero-rated supply of services. B. In case of Schedule 3, to exempt imports of personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household commodities contained in barrels. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, before I ask for the House to be suspended, I just wanted, and I know it's not the appropriate term, but hopefully, Mr. Speaker, you'll give me the opportunity, that in the annual report, there is no requirement in the annual report itself for the list of names, but there is a requirement for the legislator, meaning the House, for there to be a list. So apparently what has happened is that they did the annual report, but they did an appendix with the list of names, of which we have circulated. There is no requirement, Mr. Speaker, for the list of the agents, but if in fact members on the opposite side do want to know the names of those agents, we're very happy to be able to provide it to them. Mr. Speaker, I beg for the House to be suspended, sine die.
Honorable members, the question is, just quickly, one question before.
Mr. Speaker.
Is required. So there is an annual report, and an appendix to the annual report has all of the names. Is the member satisfied that he has the names of all the people that were approved under CIP for the annual report?
Mr. Speaker, the point is not whether I am satisfied that I have the names. I am saying the law says the report shall have the names. So the report which will be circulated, not just in this Honorable House, but as the official report, the law says this document must have it in it. It's not a question.
Honorable members, this is a matter that can be taken up at another time. But it's duly noted. And we will surely look into this. Very well. Honorable Prime Minister, can I now adjourn to the 26th of November, or do we adjourn in sine die? No. Honorable members, the question is that this House do stand adjourned sine die. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House stands adjourned.
Well, we now come to the end of today's session in the House of Parliament. This session brought extensive debate from members of both sides of the House, which had to do with the motion presented by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service, and the Parliamentary Rep for Meekwood South, the Honorable Prime Minister Alan Chasney, that it be resolved that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedules 1 and 3 order, which amends Schedule 1 and 3 of the Act. In the case of Schedule 1, under Item 1, to include a definition of the words educational supplies. Under Item 2, to include the supply of printing and educational supplies and a zero-rated supply of service. B, in the case of Schedule 3, to exempt imports of personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household commodities contained in barrels. The motion received full support of the House and has been passed. And so this is where we come to the end of our broadcast. I wish to thank you for viewing and invite you to join us again when we will go live here in the House of Assembly. I'm Private Hutchinson. Thanking you again for viewing.